A single father saved a collapsing stranger in traffic and lost the only job interview that could save his family. What he didn't know was that the woman he rescued held the power to change his life forever. If you want to see how one moment of kindness can rewrite a desperate man's entire future, stay with me until the very end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The July heat shimmered off the Chicago pavement like waves on water, turning the downtown streets into a furnace. Daniel Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand as he jogged through the crowded sidewalk, his worn leather briefcase bouncing against his hip. His white dress shirt, the only one he owned without visible stains or frayed cuffs, was already soaking through at the back. The tie around his neck felt like a noose. 32 years old, and this was it. The last chance. Daniel checked his phone again, 2:47 p.m. The interview was scheduled for 3 p.m. sharp at Meridian Technologies, one of the biggest tech firms in the Midwest. He'd been told explicitly that punctuality mattered. He had 13 minutes to cover 4 more blocks. His lungs burned as he picked up his pace, dodging through clusters of tourists taking selfies in front of the bean sculpture. Normally, he would have taken the train, but the fare had gone up again, and he'd needed every dollar for the application fee, for the background check, for the printouts of his resume on decent paper. Walking saved $2.40. It seemed smart this morning. Now, as the seconds ticked away, those saved dollars felt like the dumbest decision of his life. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to check it to know it was another automated reminder from the electric company. Past due. Disconnection notice. He'd heard it all before. What they didn't understand, what nobody understood, was that he was trying. He'd been trying for 6 straight months since the warehouse laid him off. Trying while his 7-year-old son, Miles, asked why they ate spaghetti 5 nights a week. Trying while rent notices piled up on the kitchen counter. Trying while his ex-wife's lawyer sent letters about custody arrangements and financial instability. This interview wasn't just about a job. It was about keeping his son. The building loomed ahead, all glass and steel, reflecting the cloudless sky. Meridian Technologies occupied floors 12 through 22. Daniel had researched everything he could find about them. Cutting-edge software development, government contracts, a CEO known for valuing innovation and integrity. The position was entry-level facilities coordination, but it paid $48,000 a year with benefits. After 6 months of surviving on odd jobs, unemployment checks, and his dwindling savings, $48,000 sounded like winning the lottery. Daniel reached the intersection of State and Madison, breathing hard. The pedestrian signal blinked red. A crowd had gathered at the corner, office workers returning from lunch, students with backpacks, delivery drivers checking their phones. Daniel shifted his weight from foot to foot, watching the countdown timer. 23 seconds. Too long. He could jaywalk. The traffic wasn't that heavy, but getting hit by a car definitely wouldn't help his chances, and he'd already pressed his luck enough for one day. He forced himself to wait, counting down in his head. 20 seconds. 19. 18. His mind wandered to this morning, to Miles sitting at their cramped kitchen table, carefully coloring a picture he'd drawn at school, a house with a big tree, a stick figure man holding hands with a smaller stick figure. "Is that us?" Daniel had asked. Miles had nodded without looking up, tongue poking out in concentration as he shaded the tree green. "When we get our new house, with the yard you promised." Daniel's chest had tightened. "Buddy, I said maybe. We have to see how things go." "I know, but you always keep your promises, Dad." The light changed. The crowd surged forward into the crosswalk, and Daniel went with them, his mind still half lost in the memory of his son's absolute faith. He didn't deserve that kind of trust. Not when he'd failed at so much already, failed at his marriage, failed to keep steady work, failed to provide the stability every child deserved. But this interview could change that. This job could be the turning point. He was halfway across the intersection when he noticed her. A woman in a charcoal business suit, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. She'd been walking slightly ahead of him, her pace steady and purposeful. Then suddenly, she wasn't. Her stride faltered, her hand went to her temple. Even from several feet back, Daniel saw her knees buckle. She was going down. Around them, the crosswalk continued its choreographed chaos. Pedestrians flowed around obstacles like water around rocks, everyone locked into their phones, their thoughts, their own urgent destinations. The woman swayed, and Daniel saw it happening in slow motion, her briefcase slipping from her fingers, her body tilting sideways toward the pavement. And behind her, accelerating as the light began to change, a delivery truck rumbled forward. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. 3 long strides closed the distance between them. His briefcase hit the ground as he lunged forward, catching the woman around her shoulders just as her legs gave out completely. Her weight collapsed against him, and he staggered backward, his dress shoes skidding on the painted crosswalk lines. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with exertion. "I've got you." She was light, frighteningly so. And when her head lolled against his shoulder, Daniel felt a spike of real fear. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup hadn't quite concealed. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. The delivery truck passed behind them with a blast of its horn, warning or irritation, Daniel couldn't tell. The other pedestrians continued their flow around them, a few glances thrown their way, but nobody stopped. Nobody slowed down. "Miss?" Daniel adjusted his grip, taking more of her weight. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. She tried to speak, but nothing came out except a small, defeated sound. The pedestrian signal began its urgent countdown. 5, 4, 3. Daniel looked toward the opposite curb, then back at the woman sagging in his arms. He could see the Meridian Technologies building from here, its entrance less than 2 blocks away. If he left her now, if he just helped her to the sidewalk and flagged down someone else, he could still make it. Still make his 3 p.m. appointment. Still save everything that mattered. 2. 1. The light changed. Cars began accelerating into the intersection. Daniel tightened his hold on the woman and half carried, half dragged her toward the curb. When they reached the sidewalk, he carefully lowered her to sit on the edge of a concrete planter box, keeping one hand on her shoulder to steady her. "Stay with me," he said. "You're going to be okay." She blinked up at him, trying to focus. I'm fine. Just need a minute." "You're not fine." Daniel knelt in front of her, studying her face, the grayish pallor, the trembling in her hands, the way she couldn't quite seem to catch her breath. He'd seen this before, back when his mother used to skip meals to make sure he and his sister had enough to eat. "When did you last have something to eat or drink?" The woman opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. She looked away, embarrassed. "This morning. Coffee, I think." "You think?" "Yesterday morning," she admitted quietly. "Maybe." Daniel sat back on his heels, absorbing this. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. A street performer's saxophone played a melancholy jazz melody. The woman in front of him looked like she belonged in a boardroom, not collapsed on a street corner. Her suit probably cost more than Daniel's entire wardrobe. The watch on her wrist was elegant, expensive. Everything about her screamed success, competence, control. Except she'd nearly passed out in the middle of traffic because she'd forgotten to eat. Daniel checked his phone, showed 2:54 p.m. His interview was in 6 minutes. The Meridian building was still 2 blocks away. Even if he ran, and he'd have to run, he'd be cutting it impossibly close. And that was if he left right now. If he abandoned this woman who could barely hold her head up. He looked at her again. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Saw the way her hands shook when she tried to smooth down her jacket. Saw someone who'd been running on empty for so long she'd forgotten what full felt like. Daniel had been there. Was there now, actually. The difference was that his emptiness came from having no choice. Hers seemed to come from having too many obligations, too many demands, too many people depending on her to hold it all together. "Okay," he said, making the decision even as his stomach dropped. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit right here and not move. I'm going to get you some food and water. Then we're going to make sure you're stable enough to get wherever you need to go safely." "No." She tried to stand, wobbling immediately. Daniel caught her elbow. "No, I have to. There's a meeting. I can't miss it." "You're not going to any meeting like this." "You don't understand." There was desperation in her voice now. It's critical. The whole project depends on it. If you're not there, someone else will handle it, Daniel said firmly. But if you collapse in the middle of the street, or worse, in the middle of traffic, then a lot more than one meeting is going to fall apart. Trust me on this. She stared at him, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might actually argue. Then something in her seemed to deflate. She sank back onto the planter box, her shoulders dropping. I don't even know you, she said softly. My name is Daniel Brooks. He glanced around, spotting a bodega on the corner. Stay here. I'll be right back. I can pay. Just stay here. Daniel jogged to the bodega, his mind screaming at him the entire way. What are you doing? You're throwing away everything. For a stranger. For someone who probably won't even remember your name tomorrow. But he couldn't leave her. Wouldn't. Whatever his failures as a husband, as a provider, he'd always tried to be a decent human being. It was the one thing his mother had drilled into him before cancer took her. Character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one would ever know the difference. Inside the bodega, Daniel grabbed a bottle of orange juice, a banana, and a protein bar. At the counter, the cashier rang him up with practiced disinterest. $7.32. Daniel pulled out his wallet, $23 and a few coins. Enough for the rest of the week's groceries if he was careful. Enough for Miles's school lunch money. Not enough to do both. He handed over a 10 without hesitation. When he returned to the planter box, the woman was still there, her head tilted back, eyes closed against the sun. Daniel knelt beside her again and pressed the orange juice into her hands. Drink this, slowly. She obeyed without argument, taking small sips. Daniel unwrapped the protein bar and broke off a piece. Now eat. You're very bossy, she murmured, but she took the protein bar. I have a 7-year-old son. Bossy is my default setting. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across her lips. She ate slowly, mechanically, like someone who'd forgotten that food was supposed to provide pleasure as well as fuel. Daniel sat back on the curb and watched her, watched the color gradually return to her cheeks, watched her breathing steady and deepen. His phone buzzed. 3:03 p.m. He was officially late. Daniel pulled up the email with his interview confirmation and found the contact number for Meridian Technologies' HR department. His finger hovered over the call button. Maybe if he explained, maybe if they understood that there was an emergency, a medical situation, they'd reschedule. He was only a few minutes late. Surely they could make an exception. You're missing something important. The woman's voice cut through his thoughts. She was watching him, her eyes clear now. Because of me. Daniel tried to smile. I'm exactly where I need to be. Liar? But there was no accusation in it, just weary recognition. What are you missing? Nothing that can't wait. More lies. Daniel looked down at his phone, at the Meridian Technologies logo on the screen, at the position he'd spent weeks preparing for, at the salary that would have solved so many problems, at the future he could feel slipping through his fingers like sand. A job interview, he said finally, for a position I really needed. The woman went very still. When? 3 o'clock. It's 3:04. I know. She stared at him, something complicated flickering across her face, guilt, confusion, something else Daniel couldn't quite identify. Call them, explain. They'll understand. Daniel shook his head. I was explicitly told punctuality was essential. They're not going to reschedule for someone who couldn't even show up on time to the first interview. But you were helping someone who, they don't know that. And even if I told them, it sounds like an excuse. Daniel pocketed his phone. It's fine. There'll be other opportunities. He didn't believe that. Not really. Jobs like this, stable, well-paying, with room for growth, didn't come around every day, especially not for someone with his spotty employment history. But sitting here on this curb, watching this woman who'd been so depleted she couldn't even stand, Daniel couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. Some things mattered more than a job interview. Some things mattered more than getting ahead. The woman finished the protein bar in silence. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. What company? Does it matter? Humor me. Daniel hesitated. Meridian Technologies. It was for a facilities coordination position. Something strange happened to her expression, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. But before Daniel could process it, she was standing, testing her balance. She swayed slightly, and Daniel rose to steady her. "Better," she said. "Much better. Thank you." "You sure you're okay to—" "I'm fine." She looked at him directly for the first time, really looked. Her eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, intelligent and assessing. "Daniel Brooks, with the 7-year-old son who made you bossy." "That's me." "I'm Claire." She held out her hand. Her grip was stronger now, though still trembling slightly. "And I owe you more than I can repay right now." "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree." Claire retrieved her briefcase from where it had fallen. "But I do need to go. That critical meeting I mentioned, it really can't wait." Daniel wanted to argue, to insist she go to a hospital, or at least somewhere she could rest properly. But the set of her jaw told him she'd made up her mind. Some battles weren't worth fighting. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Actually eat, actually sleep." "Bossy," Claire repeated, but this time there was definite warmth in it. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, call me." Daniel took the card, glancing at it briefly before slipping it into his pocket. "I will. You take care." He watched her walk away, her stride still uncertain but growing steadier with each step. When she disappeared around the corner, Daniel stood alone on the sidewalk, his briefcase still lying forgotten in the middle of the crosswalk where he'd dropped it. He retrieved it, checking for damage. One corner was scuffed, but otherwise intact. Just like him, he supposed. A little more battered than before, but still functional. Daniel checked his phone one more time. 3:12 p.m. Definitely too late now. He pulled up the Meridian Technologies number and made the call anyway. Professional courtesy, if nothing else. "Meridian Technologies, Human Resources, this is Jennifer speaking." "Hi, Jennifer. My name is Daniel Brooks. I had an interview scheduled for 3 p.m. for the facilities coordination position. I'm calling to apologize for missing it." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Yes, Mr. Brooks. I see your appointment here. You were marked as a no-show at 3:05. "I understand. I had an emergency situation, and I couldn't make it in time. I know that's not an acceptable excuse, but I wanted to call and apologize personally rather than just disappearing." "I appreciate that, Mr. Brooks." Jennifer's voice was professional, but not unkind. "Unfortunately, our policy is quite strict regarding interview punctuality. Missed appointments are flagged in our system, and we're unable to reschedule first interviews." "I understand. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry we couldn't work this out. Good luck with your job search." The line went dead. Daniel stood there holding his phone, feeling the full weight of what had just happened settle onto his shoulders. Flagged in their system. That meant even if another position opened up, he'd be automatically screened out. He'd just blacklisted himself from one of the largest employers in Chicago, for a woman whose last name he didn't even know. Daniel started walking, not toward home. He couldn't face their tiny apartment yet, couldn't face Miles's hopeful questions about the interview. Instead, he walked aimlessly through the downtown streets, letting the crowds wash around him like he was a stone in a river. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from his ex-wife, Vanessa. "Vanessa. Lawyer says custody hearing is set for August 15th. Hope you have your employment situation figured out by then." Daniel closed his eyes and counted to 10, then 20. Vanessa wasn't trying to be cruel, or maybe she was. He honestly couldn't tell anymore. Their marriage had ended 2 years ago in a blur of accusations and resentments, most of which he probably deserved. She'd wanted stability, ambition, a partner who was going somewhere. He'd wanted to feel like he mattered, like he was more than just a paycheck and a plan. In the end, neither of them got what they wanted, except Miles. Miles was the one good thing they'd created together, and now even that was in jeopardy. Vanessa had remarried last year to a financial consultant named Richard, who wore expensive suits and drove a Tesla. They had a house in Evanston with a yard and a good school district. Everything Daniel couldn't provide. Daniel. "I'll be fine by then." Another lie. He was getting good at those. Daniel found himself at Millennium Park, settling onto a bench near the fountain where Miles loved to play on hot summer days. A group of kids were there now, shrieking with laughter as they ran through the water jets, their parents watching from the shade. Daniel thought about all the promises he'd made to his son. The bigger apartment, the yard, the stability, the life they deserved. He pulled out Claire's business card. Claire Hale, Chief Technology Officer. Meridian Technologies. Daniel read it 3 times, certain he'd misread. But no, there it was in raised lettering. Meridian Technologies. The same company he'd just been blacklisted from. And not just any employee, the Chief Technology Officer. The woman he'd saved was high-level executive at the company that had just rejected him. Daniel laughed, a short, bitter sound. Of course she was. The universe had a sense of humor after all. He should call her, should explain what happened, ask if she could intervene. She'd said he could call if he needed anything. Surely getting unblacklisted from the company system counted as needing something. But even as the thought formed, Daniel dismissed it. What would that accomplish? He'd just leverage a desperate woman's gratitude to get a job he hadn't earned? Use a chance encounter to bypass the rules everyone else had to follow? That wasn't who he wanted to be. Wasn't who he wanted Miles to grow up seeing. Daniel tucked the business card back into his wallet and checked the time. 4:15 p.m. Miles would be getting out of after-school care soon. Daniel needed to pick him up, needed to figure out what he was going to say about the interview, needed to start searching for other options. He stood, brushing off his dress pants, and started the long walk to the elementary school. The afternoon heat had broken slightly, a breeze coming off the lake carrying the promise of cooler evening air. By the time Daniel reached the school, he'd composed himself enough to smile when Miles came bounding out of the building, his Spider-Man backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Dad!" Miles crashed into him with the full-body enthusiasm only 7-year-olds could manage. "How'd it go? Did you get the job?" Daniel knelt down, pulling his son into a proper hug. "The interview didn't work out, buddy, but it's okay. There'll be other chances." Miles pulled back, his face serious. "What happened?" "I helped someone who needed help, and it made me late." "Oh." Miles processed this, his expression thoughtful. Then he brightened. "That's good though, right? You always say helping people is the right thing to do." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, pride and pain all mixed together. "Yeah, kiddo. It's the right thing. So you didn't get the job, but you did the right thing. That's still good. If only the world worked that way. If only doing the right thing actually mattered when rent was due and the power company was sending final notices." But Daniel just smiled and ruffled Miles's hair. "Come on, let's go home." They walked the 12 blocks to their apartment building, Miles chattering about his day, about the chapter book his teacher was reading to the class, about the kid in his class who could burp the alphabet. Daniel listened, responding at the right moments, trying not to think about the bills waiting at home, or the custody hearing looming in August, or the job he'd just lost before even getting it. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had probably been nice in the 1970s. Now it was just tired, peeling paint in the hallways, a perpetually broken elevator, the smell of a dozen different dinners cooking in too close quarters. But it was home. For now. "Spaghetti again?" Miles asked as Daniel unlocked their door. "Actually, I was thinking we'd get creative tonight. How about spaghetti with extra cheese?" Miles giggled. "That's the same thing." "Is it though?" Daniel dropped his briefcase by the door and headed to the kitchen. "Is it really?" While the pasta boiled, Daniel scrolled through job listings on his phone. Warehouse positions, night security, delivery driver. Nothing that paid what he needed, nothing with benefits, nothing that would satisfy a family court judge that he could provide stability for his son. "Dad?" Miles appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his backpack. "Are we going to have to move again?" Daniel looked up sharply. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard you on the phone last night, talking to the landlord." Miles shifted his weight from foot to foot, not quite meeting Daniel's eyes. He was yelling about rent. So much for protecting him from adult worries. Daniel set down his phone and crossed to his son, kneeling so they were eye level. "We're going to figure it out," he said. "I promise. I'm going to find another job, a good one, and we're going to be fine." "What if you don't?" I will. But what if it... Miles. Daniel took his son's hands. Do you trust me? Miles nodded immediately. That absolute, unearned faith again. Then trust me on this. We're going to be okay. It was another lie, of course, but maybe if Daniel said it enough times, it would become true through sheer force of repetition. They ate dinner sitting on the floor in front of the TV. Their dining table had been repossessed 3 months ago, along with most of their other furniture. Miles fell asleep halfway through his favorite cartoon, his head pillowed on Daniel's lap. Daniel sat there in the flickering television light, stroking his son's hair, thinking about crosswalks and choices and the price of doing the right thing. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Unknown. This is Claire Hale. I wanted to check in and make sure you were doing all right after this afternoon. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back. Daniel. I'm fine. How are you feeling? Unknown. Much better. Ate dinner, even. Your influence. Daniel. Good. Keep that up. There was a pause, then, unknown. I did some research. Found out about your interview at Meridian. I'm so sorry. Daniel's stomach sank. Of course she'd found out. She probably had access to all the HR records. Daniel. Not your fault. My choice. Unknown. Still, I feel responsible. Daniel. Don't. I'd make the same choice again. Another pause, longer this time. Unknown. Why? Daniel looked down at Miles, sleeping peacefully, trusting absolutely that his father would figure everything out, would keep them safe, would keep his promises. Daniel. Because some things matter more than a job. Unknown. Even when you needed it that badly? Daniel. Especially then. No response came. Daniel waited, watching the 3 typing dots appear and disappear several times. Finally. Unknown. Get some rest, Daniel Brooks, and keep that business card somewhere safe. Daniel. Already in my wallet? Unknown. Good. The conversation ended there. Daniel carefully shifted Miles, carrying his son to their shared bedroom and tucking him into the bottom bunk. The top bunk, which was supposed to be for guests or storage, held boxes of clothes they'd outgrown or couldn't fit in their tiny closet. Daniel lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to Miles's quiet breathing. Tomorrow he'd start the search again. Tomorrow he'd figure out Plan B, Plan C, whatever plan came after losing the opportunity that was supposed to save them. Tomorrow he'd be the father Miles deserved. But tonight, lying in the dark, Daniel let himself acknowledge the truth. He was terrified. Terrified of failing, of losing his son, of becoming his own worst nightmare. And the worst part was that he'd done it to himself. He'd chosen a stranger over his own future. He just hoped it wouldn't turn out to be the worst decision of his life. 3 weeks passed. Daniel worked doubles at a warehouse across town, loading trucks in the pre-dawn darkness, his body aching by the time he stumbled home to pick up Miles from school. He applied to 47 positions. He got 3 callbacks, 2 rejections, and 1 interview for a sales position that paid on commission only. He was scheduled to meet with Vanessa's lawyer next week to discuss custody arrangements. The rent was now 6 weeks overdue. And then his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize from an area code that made his heart stutter. Is this Daniel Brooks? Speaking. Mr. Brooks, this is Jennifer from Meridian Technologies Human Resources. We spoke briefly a few weeks ago about a missed interview. Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. Yes, I remember. I'm calling because we'd like to invite you to come in for a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m., if you're available. Daniel's mind raced. I thought I was flagged in your system for missing the interview. You were. Jennifer's voice was carefully neutral. However, we've received a special request to meet with you from upper management. This isn't for the facilities coordination position, but rather for a different opportunity that's just become available. What kind of opportunity? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you it's a significant role and the request came from the executive level. Are you interested? Daniel thought about the warehouse job he'd have to call off for, thought about Miles, about the promises he'd made, about crosswalks and choices that seemed impossible in the moment. "Yes," he said. "I'm interested." "Excellent. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ask for Jennifer at reception and I'll escort you up." "Up where?" "The executive floor, Mr. Brooks, 22nd floor." The line went dead. Daniel stood there in his warehouse break room, surrounded by the smell of cardboard and diesel fuel, holding his phone like it might explode. The executive floor, the 22nd floor, where the CEO's office was, where Claire Hale's office was. Daniel pulled out his wallet and found the business card, now bent and worn from 3 weeks of being carried around. He traced the raised lettering with his thumb. Claire Hale, Chief Technology Officer, Meridian Technologies. Tomorrow. He'd find out if doing the right thing had cost him everything, or if maybe, just maybe, it had saved him after all. Daniel barely slept that night. He lay in bed running through every possible scenario, each more unlikely than the last. Maybe they were going to formally reprimand him for wasting their time. Maybe Claire felt obligated to help him, but could only offer some low-level position out of guilt. Maybe this was all a massive misunderstanding, and Jennifer had called the wrong Daniel Brooks. By the time his alarm went off at 6, he'd already been awake for 2 hours. Miles stirred in the bunk below, rubbing his eyes. "Dad? Why are you up so early?" "I have an important meeting today, buddy." "Another interview?" Miles sat up, his hair sticking up in every direction. "Something like that." Daniel pulled out his white dress shirt, the same one from 3 weeks ago, now freshly washed and pressed. "Mrs. Chen is going to take you to school today, okay?" Mrs. Chen was their elderly neighbor who occasionally helped with childcare when Daniel's schedule got complicated. She never asked for payment, just accepted the occasional grocery run or help with her air conditioning unit as trade. "Is this for the job you really need?" Miles asked, his voice small. Daniel knelt beside the bunk. "Yeah, kiddo, it might be." "Then you'll get it. I know you will." That absolute faith again. Daniel pulled his son into a hug, breathing in the scent of kid shampoo and sleep. "I love you, you know that?" "I know. Love you too, Dad." By 9:30, Daniel stood outside the Meridian Technologies building, the same glass and steel tower he'd rushed toward 3 weeks ago. This time, he was 45 minutes early, his resume printed on good paper, his shoes polished until they almost looked new. His hands were sweating despite the morning cool. The lobby was all marble and modern art, with a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of white stone. Daniel approached carefully, feeling out of place among the executives and employees who moved through the space with confident familiarity. "I'm Daniel Brooks," he told the receptionist. "I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Jennifer from HR." The receptionist checked her computer, then smiled, a professional expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Brooks, please have a seat. Jennifer will be down shortly." Daniel sat in one of the modern chairs that prioritized aesthetics over comfort. Around him, the lobby hummed with quiet efficiency. People swiped security badges at turnstiles. Elevators chimed their arrivals and departures. Everyone looked purposeful, like they belonged here. Daniel had never felt more like an imposter in his life. "Mr. Brooks?" He looked up to find Jennifer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and sensible heels. She extended her hand. "Thank you for coming. If you'll follow me?" Daniel grabbed his briefcase and stood. "Thank you for the opportunity." Jennifer led him through the security turnstiles, providing him with a visitor badge, then to a private elevator that required her badge to access. As the doors closed, she turned to him with an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. "I'm sure you're wondering what this is about." The thought crossed my mind. "I can't tell you much, but I will say this. You made quite an impression on someone very important here. That doesn't happen often." She paused. "Whatever happens in this meeting, just be yourself. That's clearly what got you here." The elevator rose swiftly, the floor numbers ticking upward. 15, 17, 20. When it finally stopped at 22, Daniel's heart was hammering so hard he was sure Jennifer could hear it. The executive floor was even more impressive than the lobby. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Chicago's skyline. The carpeting was thick enough to swallow sound. Original artwork lined the walls. Not prints, but actual paintings that probably cost more than Daniel made in a year. Jennifer led him down a hallway to a conference room. "Wait here, please. Someone will be with you shortly." Then she was gone, and Daniel was alone. He sat at the massive conference table, his briefcase resting on his lap like a shield. The room had windows on two sides, offering views that made him feel like he was floating above the city. Somewhere down there was his warehouse job, his tiny apartment. Miles, sitting in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, eating breakfast before school. The door opened. Daniel stood immediately, nearly dropping his briefcase. But it wasn't Claire who entered. It was a man in his mid-60s, silver-haired and commanding in a charcoal suit that was clearly custom-tailored. His presence filled the room even before he spoke. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Richard Hale. Please, sit down." Richard Hale, the CEO. Daniel had seen his photo on the company website, read articles about his leadership philosophy, his reputation for innovation and integrity. And now he was standing 10 feet away, studying Daniel with an intensity that made him want to squirm. Daniel sat. Richard took the seat directly across from him, folding his hands on the table. "I suppose you're wondering why you're here." "Yes, sir. 3 weeks ago, you missed an interview for a facilities coordination position. Our policy regarding missed interviews is quite strict. We flag candidates who don't show up, and we don't reschedule. You're aware of this?" Daniel's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." "Can you tell me why you missed that interview?" This was it. The moment where Daniel either told the truth and sounded like he was making excuses, or lied and probably got caught. He chose the truth. "I helped someone who was in medical distress. She nearly collapsed in the middle of traffic. I stayed with her to make sure she was okay, and by the time I could leave, I was late. Too late." Richard's expression didn't change. "And you didn't think to call? To explain the situation?" "I did call, sir. After the interview time had passed, I was told that missed appointments couldn't be rescheduled." "So you just accepted that? Accepted being blacklisted from future opportunities here?" Daniel met his gaze directly. "I accepted that I'd made my choice. I'd choose helping someone over making an appointment. If that meant losing the job opportunity, then that was the consequence I'd have to live with." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Approval, maybe, though Daniel couldn't be sure. The CEO stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the city. "The person you helped," Richard said quietly. "Do you know who she was?" "I do now. I didn't at the time. And if you had known, if you'd recognized my daughter, known she was the CTO of the company you were interviewing with, would you have made a different choice?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel considered lying, considered saying what he thought Richard wanted to hear. But something in the older man's posture told him that dishonesty would be worse than any truth. "No, sir. I would have made the same choice." Richard turned from the window. "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do. Whether she was a CEO's daughter or a homeless person on the street, she needed help. I couldn't walk away from that. Even though you desperately needed that job?" "Especially because I desperately needed it." Richard studied him for a long moment. Then he returned to the table, pulling out a tablet and turning it to face Daniel. On the screen was security footage from the intersection, grainy but clear enough to show Daniel catching Claire, the crowd flowing around them, the delivery truck passing dangerously close. "I've watched this footage a dozen times," Richard said. "Do you know what I see?" Daniel shook his head. "I see a man who didn't hesitate, who didn't look around for someone else to handle the problem, who saw another human being in need and immediately moved to help, despite the personal cost." Richard paused. "I also see what happened after." He tapped the tablet, Marchi, and the footage shifted to show Daniel sitting on the curb with Claire, unpacking food and water from a bodega bag. The timestamp showed 2:57 p.m., 3 minutes before his interview. "You could have left her there," Richard continued. "Could have made sure she was sitting down and then rushed to make your appointment. You might have even made it on time, but you stayed, made sure she ate, made sure she could stand before you let her go." He looked up at Daniel. "That tells me something about your character that no interview ever could." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Richard sat back in his chair. My daughter nearly died that day, Mr. Brooks. Not from the collapse itself, but from what would have happened if she'd fallen differently. If that truck had been 2 seconds faster, if you hadn't been paying attention. His voice roughened slightly. Claire is brilliant, driven, and completely incapable of recognizing her own limits. She's been running herself into the ground for months on a critical project, ignoring every warning sign until her body simply gave out. And I didn't notice. Her mother didn't notice. Her entire team didn't notice. But you, a stranger rushing to an interview, you noticed. Sir, Let me finish. Richard's tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. After Claire told me what happened, I did some research on you. Daniel Brooks, 32 years old, single father to a 7-year-old son, laid off from warehouse work 6 months ago, currently 3 months behind on rent, custody hearing scheduled for next month with your ex-wife, who's arguing that you can't provide financial stability. He paused. How am I doing so far? Daniel felt his face burn. Hearing his failures laid out so clinically made them seem even worse. That's accurate. You've applied to 47 positions in the last month alone, rejected from most, working overnight shifts at a warehouse that pays $9 an hour. And yet, when faced with a choice between your future and a stranger's safety, you chose the stranger, every time. Richard leaned forward. Why? Because that's what my son needs to see, Daniel said quietly. He needs to see that doing the right thing matters, that people matter more than opportunities. I know that sounds naive, especially given my situation, but I can't teach him that character matters if I don't live it myself. The room fell silent except for the muted sounds of the city beyond the windows. Richard stood again, this time walking to a cabinet built into the wall. He pulled out 2 bottles of water, offering one to Daniel before opening his own. I built this company on a very simple principle, Mr. Brooks. Character is destiny. I don't care how talented someone is, how impressive their resume looks, how many connections they have. If they don't have integrity, real integrity, the kind that costs something, they don't belong here. He took a drink. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who actually lives by their principles when it's inconvenient? I imagine it's not common. It's almost non-existent. Richard returned to his seat. I've interviewed hundreds of candidates over the years. They all say the right things. They all claim to value integrity and character. But when tested, when there's actually something on the line, most people fold. They find justifications. They make excuses. They choose self-interest over principle every single time. With respect, sir, I'm not sure what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I want to offer you a position. Daniel's breath caught. Sir? Not the facilities coordination role. Something better. Something that actually matches your capabilities. Richard pulled a folder from his briefcase. Claire tells me you demonstrated excellent crisis management under pressure. Quick assessment of the situation, appropriate response, calm execution. Those are valuable skills, Mr. Brooks. He slid the folder across the table. Daniel opened it to find a job description that made his head spin. Operations Coordinator, Executive Division, direct report to the Chief Operations Officer, salary, $65,000 annually plus benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, retirement matching, professional development budget. I don't understand, Daniel said. This is an executive level support role. I don't have the qualifications for. You have exactly the qualifications I'm looking for, Richard interrupted. Intelligence, integrity, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. Everything else can be taught. Daniel stared at the job description, his mind reeling. This was more than he'd hoped for, more than he'd dreamed possible. It would solve every financial problem he had. The rent, the custody hearing, Miles's future, all of it, secured with a single signature. Why? He asked. Why would you do this? Because you saved my daughter's life without knowing who she was. Because you sacrificed your own future for a stranger. Because when I look at you, I see the kind of person I want representing this company. Richard's expression softened slightly. And because I remember what it's like to be desperate, to be struggling, to feel like the world is stacked against you. Someone gave me a chance once. I'm returning the favor. Daniel felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take the position. Say you'll bring that same integrity to this job that you showed in that crosswalk. That's all I'm asking. I will. Absolutely, I will. Daniel heard his voice crack slightly. Thank you, Mr. Hale. You have no idea what this means. I think I do. Richard stood, extending his hand. Welcome to Meridian Technologies, Mr. Brooks. Jennifer will handle all the paperwork. You'll start Monday, which gives you a few days to sort out your current situation. Any questions? Daniel stood, shaking Richard's hand. A dozen questions crowded his mind, but only one mattered. Is she okay? Is she taking care of herself? Richard smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. She's better. Still working too hard, but she's eating regularly and actually going home at night. Your influence, apparently. She says you're very bossy. I have a 7-year-old son. It's my default setting. Well, keep being bossy, especially with my daughter. She needs someone who isn't afraid to tell her the truth. Richard walked him to the door. There's someone waiting to see you, actually. Conference room 3, just down the hall. Jennifer will show you. Before Daniel could ask who, Richard was gone, disappearing into another office with the quiet efficiency of someone who had a dozen other meetings waiting. Jennifer appeared moments later, her earlier sympathy now mixed with something that looked like approval. This way, Mr. Brooks. She led him 2 doors down to another conference room, smaller than the first, but just as elegantly appointed. And sitting at the table, looking far healthier than she had 3 weeks ago, was Claire Hale. She stood when he entered, and Daniel was struck again by how different she seemed. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by healthy color. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She looked like someone who'd finally remembered how to sleep. Hi, she said simply. Hi. Daniel suddenly felt awkward, unsure of the protocol for encountering someone you'd saved from collapsing in traffic, who also happened to be your new boss's daughter. You look good. Better. I feel better. Turns out eating and sleeping actually helps with that whole staying conscious thing. She gestured to a chair. Sit, please. Daniel sat, setting his briefcase on the floor. Claire remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her like she was preparing a presentation. I owe you an apology, she said. You don't... Yes, I do. You saved my life, Daniel. And in doing so, you sacrificed an opportunity that you desperately needed. I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out how to make that right. Your father just offered me a position. That's more than right. It's life-changing. I know. I told him to. Claire sat down across from him. But I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't my father feeling sorry for you. You're genuinely qualified for this role. And if you weren't, no amount of guilt would have convinced him to offer it. How can you possibly know I'm qualified? You barely know me. I know that when faced with an impossible choice, you chose compassion over self-interest. I know that you assess situations quickly and respond appropriately. I know that you're responsible, given that you're raising a child alone and clearly prioritizing his well-being above your own. She paused. And I know that you're honest, because you didn't call me to ask for help even though you had my card. That shows integrity. Daniel absorbed this. I didn't call because I didn't want to leverage your gratitude. I know. That's exactly why my father is hiring you. Claire pulled out her own tablet, bringing up what looked like a project timeline. The operations coordinator position is real, and it's critical. We're in the middle of a major infrastructure overhaul, and we need someone who can coordinate between departments, manage competing priorities, and make judgment calls when things get complicated. My father thinks you can do that. So do I. Based on one encounter? Based on watching you handle a crisis with grace under pressure. Based on learning about your background and seeing how you've managed incredibly difficult circumstances without compromising your values. She looked at him directly. Character reveals itself in crisis, Daniel. You revealed yours. Now I'm trusting that you'll bring that same character to this job. Daniel felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders. What if I fail? What if I'm not actually good at this? Then we'll train you until you are. But I don't think you will. Claire set down her tablet. Can I tell you something about that day? Of course. I was ready to quit. Not just my job, everything. I was so exhausted, so burned out, that I'd convinced myself nothing mattered except the project. Not my health, not my relationships, not my own well-being. I was running on caffeine and stubbornness, and I genuinely believed that was sustainable. She smiled sadly. Then I woke up on a curb with a stranger feeding me protein bars and telling me I wasn't allowed to go to my meeting. You seemed pretty determined to go anyway. I was, but you planted a seed of doubt, made me question whether pushing myself to literal collapse was actually strength or just stupidity. Claire's voice softened. You saved my life in that crosswalk, but you also saved it by forcing me to acknowledge I'd hit my limit. Nobody else had managed that. Not my father, not my team, not even myself. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Around them, the building hummed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the soft rush of the ventilation system. I'm glad you're okay, he said finally. Really glad. Me too. Claire stood and Daniel followed suit. You start Monday, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. My father has a thing about punctuality. I'll be early. Good. She extended her hand and Daniel shook it. Her grip was firm, confident, completely different from the trembling hand he'd held 3 weeks ago. Welcome to Meridian, Daniel. I think you're going to do great things here. After Jennifer finished the paperwork, tax forms, direct deposit information, benefit selection that made Daniel's head spin, he found himself back in the lobby, blinking in the late morning sunlight streaming through the glass walls. He had a folder full of documents, a benefits package that included health insurance for Miles, and a starting salary that would solve every financial problem that had been crushing him for months. He also had 4 days before he started. Daniel pulled out his phone and called his warehouse supervisor. Hey Marcus, it's Daniel Brooks. I need to give my notice. I got another job. There was a pause. Good for you, man. When's your last day? Today, actually. I'm sorry for the short notice, but don't worry about it. You've been solid, and frankly, you've been overqualified for this job since day one. Marcus sounded genuinely pleased. Go do better things, Brooks. You deserve it. Daniel's next call was to Mrs. Chen. I got the job. The good one. She let out a delighted shriek that made him pull the phone away from his ear. I knew it! I told Mr. Chen this morning. I said Daniel is going to get that job. You watch. When do you start? Monday. But I was wondering if Miles could stay with you for another hour. I have something I need to do. Of course. You take your time. We're making cookies anyway. Daniel's third call went to his landlord. Mr. Kowalski, this is Daniel Brooks from 3C. I know I'm behind on rent, but I just got a new job. I'll have the back payments to you by the end of next week, plus late fees. I just need you to hold off on the eviction notice a little longer. Mr. Kowalski, who'd been surprisingly patient given the circumstances, sounded relieved. That's good news, Daniel. Real good news. End of next week works for me. Congratulations on the job. The fourth call was the hardest. Daniel stood on the sidewalk outside Meridian Technologies, watching people stream past, and dialed Vanessa's number. She answered on the third ring. Daniel, is everything okay? Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I got a job. A good one, with benefits and stability and everything the lawyer was worried about. Silence. Then, you're serious? I start Monday. $65,000 a year, health insurance for Miles, the whole package. I'll send you the offer letter if you want. Vanessa sounded genuinely shocked. That's great, Daniel. Really great. What's the position? Operations Coordinator at Meridian Technologies. It's an executive-level support role. Meridian? That's a major company. How did you... Long story. But the point is, I can provide for Miles now. Stable housing, good schools, everything he needs. I'm hoping that changes things for the custody hearing. Another pause. Longer this time. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was softer. I never wanted to take him from you, Daniel. I just wanted to make sure he had stability. If you've really got this figured out, I do. I promise. Okay, let me talk to Richard and the lawyer. We'll figure something out. She hesitated. I'm proud of you. I know that probably doesn't mean much coming from me, but I am. It meant more than she knew. Thanks, Vanessa. Can I talk to Miles later? Tell him the good news? He's at school, but I'll have him call you tonight. After the call ended, Daniel stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. 4 phone calls had just restructured his entire life. 4 conversations had taken him from drowning to steady ground, all because he'd stopped in a crosswalk 3 weeks ago. Daniel walked to Millennium Park, the same bench where he'd sat reading Claire's business card, convinced the universe was mocking him. Now he sat there again, but everything had changed. The fountain was still running, kids still shrieking with laughter as they played in the water. But Daniel wasn't watching from the outside anymore, wasn't the desperate father wondering how he'd keep his promises. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo he used as his wallpaper. Miles at his 6th birthday party, chocolate cake smeared across his grinning face. That absolute faith in his eyes, that certainty that his dad would figure everything out. Daniel had figured it out, not through cleverness or connections, but through a simple choice made without thinking. A choice to help someone who needed it, consequences be damned. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Unknown. This is Claire. Got your number from HR. Hope that's not creepy. Just wanted to say again, thank you for everything. Daniel. Not creepy, and you're welcome, but I'm the one who should be thanking you. Unknown. We can both be grateful, it's allowed. Daniel. Deal. Unknown. See you Monday. Don't be nervous. You've got this. Daniel. From your mouth to the universe's ears. Unknown. The universe is listening. Trust me on that. Daniel smiled and pocketed his phone. Around him, Chicago continued its relentless rhythm, cars honking, construction equipment beeping, a street musician's saxophone playing a melody that drifted on the afternoon breeze. It was the same city he'd been navigating for months, the same streets he'd walked while job hunting, the same buildings he'd looked at with a mixture of hope and desperation. But now, sitting on this bench with a job offer in his briefcase and his son's future secured, it all looked different, brighter, full of possibility instead of obstacles. Daniel checked the time, almost noon. Miles would be at lunch now, probably trading his carrots to some other kid for their cookies like he always did. Tonight, Daniel would pick him up and take him out for a real dinner. Not spaghetti, not pasta from a box. Real food at a real restaurant where Miles could order whatever he wanted. And then he'd tell his son about crosswalks and choices, and how doing the right thing sometimes came back around in ways you couldn't predict. He'd tell him that their life was about to change, that the promises were real now, that everything was going to be okay. For the first time in 6 months, Daniel believed it himself. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. Daniel stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 5:30 a.m., adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. He'd bought 2 new dress shirts over the weekend, nothing extravagant, just clean professional clothes that fit properly. Miles had helped him pick them out, insisting on the blue one because it matched Daniel's eyes. "You look fancy, Dad," Miles had said, grinning up at him in the store. Now, staring at his reflection, Daniel barely recognized himself. Not because of the new shirt or the freshly trimmed hair, but because of the expression on his face. For the first time in months, he didn't look desperate. He looked ready. Miles appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school even though it was barely dawn. "You're going to be great," he said with that absolute certainty that still made Daniel's chest tight. "How do you know?" "Because you're my dad. You're always great." Daniel knelt down and pulled his son into a hug. "I love you, kiddo. You know that?" "I know. Now go. You don't want to be late on your first day." Daniel arrived at Meridian Technologies at 8:15, 45 minutes early. The lobby was already bustling with morning activity, executives grabbing coffee from the cafe, assistants coordinating schedules, delivery people dropping off packages. Daniel checked in at reception, received his permanent security badge, and was directed to the 22nd floor. Jennifer met him at the elevator with a warm smile and a stack of folders. "Welcome back, Mr. Brooks. Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "You'll do fine. Mr. Hale has complete faith in you, and that's not something he gives lightly." She led him down the hallway, past the conference rooms where he'd met with Richard and Claire. "Your office is just here." Office. Not a cubicle, not a shared workspace. An actual office with a door and a window. It was small, nothing compared to the executive suites, but it had a desk, a computer, a bookshelf, and a view of the Chicago skyline that made Daniel's throat tight. "The computer is already set up with your login credentials," Jennifer explained. Your first meeting is at 9:30 with Thomas Chen, the Chief Operations Officer. He'll be your direct supervisor. Until then, I've left some onboarding materials for you to review. Any questions? Just one. Is this real? Jennifer laughed. Very real, Mr. Brooks. Welcome to Meridian. After she left, Daniel sat at his desk, and let himself have one moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the view, sending it to Miles with a message. Daniel. My new office. Pretty cool, right? The response came immediately. Miles. Awesome. Can I visit? Daniel. Soon, I promise. Daniel spent the next hour reviewing the onboarding materials, trying to absorb information about company structure, department hierarchies, ongoing projects. His head was spinning by the time someone knocked on his door. Come in, he called, expecting Jennifer. Instead, Claire Hale stepped through the doorway, looking every inch the chief technology officer in a tailored navy suit, her dark hair swept back in a professional twist. She carried 2 coffee cups and wore an expression that was equal parts professional and genuinely pleased. Thought you might need this, she said, setting one of the cups on his desk. Fair warning, it's strong. You'll need the caffeine around here. Thanks. Daniel took a sip and tried not to wince. She wasn't kidding about the strength. Shouldn't you be in some important meeting? I have 15 minutes before my day becomes a disaster. Figured I'd check on our newest team member. She settled into one of the chairs across from his desk, crossing her legs. How are you feeling? Terrified, grateful, completely out of my depth. Good. That means you're paying attention. Claire smiled. Want some unsolicited advice from someone who's been here for 8 years? Please. Don't try to know everything on day one. Ask questions when you're confused. Admit when you don't understand something. The people who fail here are the ones who pretend to have it all figured out. She paused. Also, don't skip meals. Learned that one the hard way. I remember. I know you do. That's kind of the point. Claire stood, checking her watch. Thomas is good people, by the way. Demanding but fair. He'll push you, but he'll also support you. And if you ever need anything, advice, help, someone to tell you you're not completely screwing up, my door is always open. Literally. I'm 3 doors down. Why are you being so nice to me? Because you were nice to me when you had absolutely no reason to be. Claire headed for the door, then paused. Also, because I have a feeling you're going to be really good at this job, and I like being right about people. After she left, Daniel sat for a moment, absorbing the surreal nature of his new reality. 10 days ago, he'd been loading trucks in a warehouse at 4 a.m. Now he was sitting in an office on the executive floor of a major tech company, drinking coffee with the CTO. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Vanessa, talk to the lawyer. If you can maintain this job for 90 days and get caught up on support payments, we'll revise the custody arrangement. Richard agrees it's fair. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. Daniel. I'll maintain it. You have my word. Vanessa. I believe you. Good luck today. At 9:30 sharp, Daniel made his way to Thomas Chen's office. The COO was a man in his early 50s, compact and intense, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was larger than Daniel's, but surprisingly Spartan. No personal photos, no decorative items, just walls of filing cabinets and a whiteboard covered in diagrams that looked like strategic battle plans. Daniel Brooks. Thomas stood and extended his hand. His grip was firm, assessing. Sit. We have a lot to cover. For the next 90 minutes, Thomas walked Daniel through the scope of his new role. The operations coordinator position sat at the intersection of every major department, coordinating between technology, facilities, human resources, and finance to ensure that infrastructure projects stayed on track, on budget, and on schedule. We're in the middle of our biggest overhaul in a decade, Thomas explained, pulling up a complex project timeline on his computer. New server infrastructure, office renovations on 6 floors, security system upgrades, and a complete restructuring of our remote work capabilities. You'll be the central point of contact for all of it. Daniel felt his stomach drop. All of it? All of it. Your job is to make sure everyone is talking to each other, that conflicts get resolved before they become crises, and that I know about problems before they explode. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Think you can handle that? Honestly, I have no idea. Good answer. If you'd said yes immediately, I'd know you were either lying or delusional. Thomas pulled out a thick binder. This is your Bible for the next month. Every active project, every key contact, every potential bottleneck. Study it, live it, sleep with it under your pillow if you have to. Understood. I'm going to throw you in the deep end, Brooks. That's how we do things here. You'll make mistakes. Everyone does. What matters is how you handle them. Own your errors, fix them fast, and learn from them. Can you do that? Daniel thought about the last 6 months, about every mistake, every failure, every moment of desperation that had brought him to this office. Yes, sir, I can do that. Then we'll get along fine. Thomas's expression softened slightly. Richard told me about what you did, about the choice you made. That took guts. It took stupidity, according to most people. Most people don't have integrity. You do. That's worth more than experience in this job. Thomas stood, signaling the meeting's end. First assignment. There's a facilities meeting at 2 p.m. in conference room B. Server installation team versus building management. They're at each other's throats over access schedules. I need you to sit in, take notes, and come back with a recommendation for how to resolve it. Just observe? For now. Consider it your baptism by fire. Daniel spent his lunch break in his office, studying the binder Thomas had given him. The scope of the projects was staggering. Millions of dollars in infrastructure improvements, hundreds of people involved, timelines that stretched months into the future. He was supposed to coordinate all of this? His phone rang. Miles's school number. Mr. Brooks, this is Principal Martinez. Nothing to worry about, but Miles asked if he could call you during lunch. He's very excited about your new job and wanted to share his day. Do you have a moment? Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. Absolutely. A moment later, Miles's voice came through, bright with excitement. Dad, guess what happened in science class? For 5 minutes, Daniel listened to his son describe a volcano experiment involving baking soda and vinegar, his previous anxiety melting away. This was why he was here, why he'd taken this job, why every challenge ahead was worth facing. I gotta go, Dad. Lunch is over. But I'm proud of you for your new job. I'm proud of you too, kiddo, for being the best part of my day. After the call ended, Daniel felt steadier, centered, ready. The 2 p.m. meeting was exactly as chaotic as Thomas had predicted. Daniel walked into conference room B to find 8 people already arguing across the table. The server installation team, led by an intense woman named Sarah Park, needed overnight access to complete their work without disrupting business operations. Building management, headed by a gruff man named Frank Kowalski, who shared a last name with Daniel's landlord, insisted that overnight access violated security protocols and union regulations. This is the 3rd time we've had this conversation, Sarah was saying, her voice tight with frustration. Every day we delay costs the company money and puts the entire timeline at risk. And every time we bypass security protocols, we put the entire building at risk, Frank shot back. I don't care about your timeline. I care about doing this right. Daniel sat quietly in the corner, taking notes, trying to understand the underlying issues beneath the obvious conflict. It wasn't really about access schedules. It was about 2 departments with different priorities, different metrics for success, and no framework for compromise. The argument continued for 45 minutes, getting more heated but no closer to resolution. Finally, Sarah threw up her hands. This is pointless. We're just going around in circles. Agreed, Frank muttered. Someone needs to make a decision, and it's not going to be us. Daniel heard himself speak before he'd consciously decided to. What if you're both right? The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at him, the new guy who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You both have valid concerns, Daniel continued, his heart hammering. Sarah, you need overnight access to minimize disruption. Frank, you need to maintain security and follow union rules. What if there's a middle ground? We've been looking for middle ground for 3 weeks, Frank said, not unkindly. There isn't one. Maybe you've been looking at it wrong. Daniel stood and moved to the whiteboard, grabbing a marker. What if instead of overnight access to the entire floor, we create a secure zone? Limited access, union security officer present at all times, work contained to specific areas each night. That way the installation can proceed on schedule and security protocols stay intact. Sarah and Frank exchanged glances. That might work, Sarah said slowly, if we can get the security officer coverage. I can arrange that, Frank said, sounding surprised at his own words. If we're only talking about specific zones each night, not the whole floor. And we'd need a detailed schedule, Sarah added, so everyone knows exactly what's happening when. I can create that, Daniel offered. Have it to both of you by end of day tomorrow. The tension in the room had shifted from adversarial to collaborative. The meeting wrapped up 15 minutes later with handshakes instead of arguments. After everyone else had filed out, Frank lingered by the door. You're new, right? First day. Couldn't tell. That was good thinking. Frank smiled. My brother owns a building on the south side. Mentioned he had a tenant named Daniel Brooks who just got a new job. That you? Daniel felt his face flush. Yeah, that's me. I'm catching up on the back rent this week, I promise. He's not worried about it. Says you've always been straight with him, even when things were tough. That matters. Frank extended his hand. Welcome to Meridian. If you keep solving problems like that, you're going to do fine here. Daniel returned to Thomas's office at 4 p.m. with his notes and his proposed solution. The COO listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. They agreed to this? Thomas asked when Daniel finished. They agreed to try it. If I can get them the detailed schedule by tomorrow. Can you? Yes, sir. Thomas studied him for a long moment. You were supposed to observe and report back, not solve the problem yourself. Daniel's stomach sank. I overstepped. I'm sorry, don't apologize. You saw an opportunity and took it. That's exactly what I need from this position. Thomas made a note on his computer. Good work, Brooks. Keep it up. Daniel left the office feeling like he was floating. He'd made it through his first day. More than made it. He'd actually contributed something useful. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Claire. Heard you solved the server installation standoff. Impressive for day one. Daniel. How did you already hear about that? Claire. Executive floor, news travels fast. Want to grab coffee tomorrow morning? I have some projects that could use your coordination skills. Daniel. Absolutely. Claire. 8 a.m. Don't be late, and don't skip breakfast. Daniel. Yes, boss. Claire. Not your boss, your friend who happens to work here. That stopped Daniel in his tracks. Friend. Claire Hale, CTO of Meridian Technologies, daughter of the CEO, was calling herself his friend. Daniel. Friends who tell me not to skip breakfast? Claire. The best kind of friends. Daniel picked up Miles from after-school care at 6, and for the first time in months, his son didn't immediately ask if they had to eat spaghetti again. So? Miles demanded as they walked toward the car Daniel had rented for the week until he could afford to buy something reliable. Tell me everything. Daniel told him about the office, the view, the meeting where he'd helped solve a problem. Miles listened with rapt attention, asking questions, celebrating each small victory like it was a major achievement. I knew you'd be good at it, Miles said confidently. Are we still poor? The question was so direct, so innocent, that Daniel had to pause before answering. We're going to be okay now, buddy. Better than okay, I promise. Can we get pizza for dinner? We can get whatever you want. They ended up at Miles's favorite pizza place, a local joint with red checkered tablecloths and a jukebox that only played songs from the 80s. Miles ordered a personal pepperoni pizza and actually got to finish the whole thing himself instead of splitting one pizza between them. Daniel watched his son eat, watched him be a kid without worry creasing his small forehead, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. They were going to make it, really make it. Dad? Miles looked up, tomato sauce on his chin. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you help that lady? The one who made you miss your first interview? Daniel had known this question was coming eventually. He wiped Miles's chin with a napkin, thinking about how to answer. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. Sometimes doing the right thing costs us something. Sometimes it costs us a lot. But we do it anyway, because that's what it means to be a good person. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, anyone can do the right thing when it's easy. Real character shows up when it's difficult. Miles considered this, his face serious. Like when Tommy was being mean to Sarah at recess, and I told the teacher even though Tommy said he'd stop being my friend? Exactly like that. I'm still scared sometimes of doing the right thing. Daniel pulled his son close. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave, kiddo. It means you're being brave anyway, and that's the important part. The first week passed in a blur of meetings, schedules, and rapid learning curves. Daniel arrived early every morning and stayed late most evenings, absorbing information like a sponge. He coordinated between departments, resolved scheduling conflicts, and slowly began to understand the complex ecosystem that kept Meridian Technologies running. True to her word, Claire met him for coffee every morning at 8. Sometimes they talked about work, projects that needed coordination, problems that required creative solutions. Sometimes they talked about other things. Daniel learned that Claire had a master's degree in computer science from MIT, that she'd joined Meridian fresh out of grad school, that she'd worked her way up from junior developer to CTO in 8 years through sheer brilliance and relentless drive. And probably some nepotism, Claire admitted during one of their morning sessions. Being the boss's daughter doesn't hurt. You would have made it anyway, Daniel said. Nepotism might open doors, but it doesn't keep them open. You earned your position. You sound very certain about that. I am. I've seen you work. You're brilliant. Claire smiled into her coffee cup. You're good for my ego, Daniel Brooks. Just telling the truth. These morning conversations became the highlight of Daniel's day. Claire was sharp, funny, self-deprecating in a way that suggested real self-awareness rather than false modesty. She asked about Miles, about Daniel's adjustment to the job, about his life outside work. And she shared pieces of her own life, the pressure of living up to expectations, the loneliness of being seen as the boss's daughter rather than her own person, the difficulty of maintaining relationships when work consumed most of her energy. Do you date? Daniel asked one morning, then immediately regretted the question. Sorry, that's too personal. It's fine. And no, not really. Most people either want to date me because of who my father is, or they're intimidated by my position. It's exhausting. She looked at him curiously. What about you? Also, no. Between Miles and work, there's not much time. And honestly, after my marriage ended, I'm not sure I trust my judgment in that area. Your ex-wife, is she a good mother? She's a great mother. We just weren't great together. Daniel stirred his coffee. She wanted someone with ambition, someone going places. I wanted someone who saw me as more than a future paycheck. Neither of us got what we needed. Sounds like you both made mistakes. We did. But Miles deserves better than two people who resent each other. The divorce was the right choice, even if it was hard. Claire nodded slowly. My parents have been married for 35 years. Sometimes I wonder if that's why I haven't settled down. They set the bar impossibly high. Total partnership, complete trust, genuine respect. Anything less feels like settling. That's not a bad standard to have. Maybe. Or maybe it's an excuse to avoid risk. She checked her watch. Speaking of which, I have a budget meeting in 10 minutes. Walk with me? They fell into step together, moving through the hallways that Daniel was finally starting to navigate without getting lost. Other employees greeted Claire with respectful nods, their eyes sliding to Daniel with curious interest. The new guy who had coffee with the CTO every morning. He could feel the speculation, the whispered questions. Does it bother you? Claire asked as they reached her office. People wondering about us? Should it? Probably. Office gossip is inevitable, especially when you're new and spending time with an executive. She shrugged. But I don't care what people think. You're my friend. That's all that matters. Friend. There was that word again. Daniel found himself smiling. Same here. By the end of his second week, Daniel had successfully coordinated 3 major project timelines, resolved 2 interdepartmental conflicts, and implemented a new scheduling system that reduced meeting overlap by 40%. Thomas called him into his office Friday afternoon with an expression that Daniel couldn't quite read. Sit, Thomas said, gesturing to a chair. We need to talk. Daniel sat, his mind racing through every possible mistake he might have made. Thomas pulled out a performance evaluation form. I've been doing this job for 15 years. In that time, I've hired maybe 20 operations coordinators. You want to know what the average learning curve looks like? Okay. Most people struggle for the first month. They're overwhelmed, making constant mistakes, requiring extensive hand-holding. By month 2, they're starting to get the hang of it. By month 3, they're actually useful. Thomas looked up. You've been here 2 weeks and you're already performing at a month 3 level. How? Daniel blinked. I don't know. I just do what needs doing. That's the thing. You see what needs doing before anyone tells you. You anticipate problems instead of just reacting to them. That's a rare skill. Thomas leaned back. I'm putting you on the Cascade project. The what? Our biggest infrastructure initiative. Complete technology overhaul across all 22 floors. Budget of $12 million. Timeline of 18 months. It's been hemorrhaging money and running behind schedule for 3 months because nobody could coordinate all the moving pieces. Thomas's expression was serious. I'm betting that you can. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Sir, I've been here 2 weeks. I know. And you've proven you can handle complexity, manage conflicts, and think strategically. This is your chance to prove you can do it at scale. Thomas slid a folder across the desk. Read through this over the weekend. We'll meet Monday morning to discuss your approach. And Brooks? Yes, sir? Don't overthink it. Trust your instincts. They've been good so far. Daniel left the office with the folder clutched in his hands, his mind reeling. $12 million project, 18 months, after 2 weeks on the job. He was either being set up for spectacular success or catastrophic failure. His phone rang. Vanessa. Hey, he answered. Everything okay? More than okay. I just got confirmation from my lawyer. If you can maintain employment through the end of September and stay current on support payments, we'll revise the custody agreement to 50-50. Daniel stopped walking, nearly dropping the folder. 50-50? Really? Really. Richard and I agree that Miles should have equal time with both parents, assuming you can provide stability. And it looks like you can. Vanessa paused. I'm happy for you, Daniel, truly. You deserved a break. After they hung up, Daniel stood in the hallway, letting the news wash over him. 50-50 custody. Equal time with his son. The thing he'd been terrified of losing, now within reach. All because he'd stopped in a crosswalk to help a stranger. That weekend, Daniel spread the Cascade project materials across his small kitchen table while Miles colored at the other end. The scope was even more complex than Thomas had indicated. Coordinated installations across multiple systems, dependencies that created bottlenecks, contractors who needed to work in sequence but kept overlapping. No wonder it was behind schedule. But as Daniel studied the timelines, he began to see patterns, opportunities for parallel workflows, ways to restructure the sequence to eliminate bottlenecks. It was like solving a puzzle, finding the one arrangement that made all the pieces fit. What are you working on? Miles asked, looking up from his drawing. A really big project for work, trying to figure out how to make everything fit together. Miles came around the table to look at the charts and diagrams. It's like a maze. Kind of, yeah. Mazes are easy. You just work backward from where you want to end up. Daniel stared at his son, then back at the timeline. Work backward from the end goal. Of course. Instead of trying to optimize the beginning of the process, what if he started with the final deadline and worked backward, identifying which dependencies absolutely had to be in place at each stage? Miles, you're a genius, his son beamed. I know. By Sunday night, Daniel had a complete restructuring proposal. It was ambitious, requiring some teams to accelerate their schedules while others delayed certain phases. But it eliminated the critical bottlenecks and brought the project back on timeline without increasing costs. He hoped Thomas wouldn't think he was insane for proposing such dramatic changes after 2 weeks on the job. Monday morning, Danielle arrived at 7 a.m. to find Claire already in her office, bent over her own set of project documents. She looked up when he knocked. You're here early. Couldn't sleep, too much nervous energy about the Cascade project. Thomas told you? Claire smiled. That's a big deal, Daniel. That project has been a nightmare. I noticed. I have some ideas, but I'm not sure if... Show me. For the next hour, Daniel walked Claire through his proposal. She listened intently, asking sharp questions, pushing back on assumptions, forcing him to defend his reasoning. By the end, she was nodding. This could actually work, she said, but you're going to face resistance from teams who don't want to change their schedules. I know. And if it fails, you'll take the blame. I know that too. Claire studied him. You're not scared? I'm terrified, but Miles taught me something this weekend. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're being brave anyway. Smart kid. The smartest. Claire stood, gathering her own folders. Come on. Thomas's meeting is in 20 minutes. Let's go change the trajectory of a $12 million project. As they walked together toward Thomas's office, Daniel felt the same feeling he'd had in that crosswalk 3 weeks ago. The sense of standing at a decision point, of choosing a path that would change everything. Then he'd chosen compassion over ambition. Now he was choosing confidence over safety, trusting that the same instincts that had brought him this far wouldn't fail him now. Some choices were worth the risk. Some moments demanded courage. This was one of them. Thomas's office felt smaller with 3 people in it. Claire settled into one of the chairs while Daniel stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, his restructuring proposal laid out on the conference table. The COO sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, expression unreadable as he studied the documents. Walk me through it, Thomas said. From the beginning. Daniel took a breath and began. He explained the backward planning methodology, how working from the final deadline revealed critical path dependencies that weren't obvious in the original timeline. He showed how restructuring the installation sequence would eliminate bottlenecks without requiring additional resources. He addressed the budget implications, the team coordination challenges, the risk mitigation strategies. Thomas listened without interrupting for 20 minutes. When Daniel finished, the silence stretched long enough to make his palms sweat. This requires moving up the hardware installation by 6 weeks, Thomas finally said. The vendor team will fight you on that. I know. But if they can't accelerate, we delay the software integration phase to accommodate them. Either way, we eliminate the overlap that's been killing our timeline. And the facilities team? They're already stretched thin. We consolidate their work into focused sprints instead of spreading it across the entire timeline. 3 intensive weeks instead of 12 fragmented ones. Less disruption, better efficiency. Thomas turned to Claire. Your thoughts? It's aggressive, she said. But the logic is sound. The current approach isn't working. We've proven that over 3 months. This at least gives us a framework for success instead of just hoping things improve. Hoping isn't a strategy, Thomas agreed. He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Daniel exchanged a glance with Claire, who gave him an encouraging nod. You've been here 2 weeks, Brooks. 2 weeks, and you're proposing to restructure a $12 million project that's been in planning for over a year. Yes, sir? That takes either exceptional confidence or exceptional stupidity. Thomas turned to face him. I'm betting on confidence. You've got authorization to move forward, but understand this. You own this now. Success or failure, it's on you. Daniel felt his heart rate spike. I understand. Good. I want a detailed implementation plan by end of week. You'll present to the executive committee Monday. That means my boss, Claire's father, and every other C-level executive who will have opinions about how you're spending their money. Thomas's expression softened slightly. No pressure. None at all, Daniel managed. After the meeting, Claire walked with him back toward his office. You okay? You look like you might pass out. I just committed to overhauling a massive project after being here 2 weeks. I'm questioning every life choice that led to this moment. Good. Healthy fear keeps you sharp. She stopped outside her office door. Want some advice? Desperately. The executive committee presentation, they're not looking for perfection. They're looking for someone who understands the problem, has a clear plan, and can defend their reasoning under pressure. You've already proven you can do all 3. Claire smiled. Plus, you've got something none of the previous coordinators had. What's that? My father already likes you. He's not going to let you fail. That's reassuring and terrifying in equal measure. Welcome to working on the executive floor. Claire checked her watch. I have a meeting, but let's grab lunch later. I want to help you prep for the presentation. You don't have to do that. I know. But we're friends, remember? Friends help each other not humiliate themselves in front of the C-suite. The next 4 days were a controlled chaos of planning, coordination, and preparation. Daniel worked 12-hour days, mapping out every detail of the restructured timeline. He met with team leads from facilities, IT, hardware installation, and software integration, selling them on the new approach, addressing concerns, negotiating compromises. Some embraced the changes immediately. Others fought him at every turn. The hardest sell was Marcus Webb, the hardware installation lead. He was a man in his late 40s who'd been doing installations for 20 years and didn't appreciate a newcomer telling him to accelerate his schedule. 6 weeks faster, Marcus said, his voice dripping with skepticism during their Thursday meeting. You understand we're talking about enterprise-grade server installations across 22 floors? This isn't like hooking up a laptop, kid. Daniel kept his voice even. I understand completely. I've reviewed your original timeline and your resource allocation. The 6-week acceleration is achievable if we adjust the installation sequence and add weekend shifts. Weekend shifts cost overtime. That blows the budget. Not if we reduce the overall timeline. We're currently paying for extended project management, delayed productivity, and compound scheduling conflicts. The overtime costs are offset by eliminating those inefficiencies. Daniel pulled up a spreadsheet. Net savings of $200,000 over the full project. Marcus studied the numbers, his skepticism slowly shifting to grudging interest. You really think this works? I do, but I need you to believe it too. This only succeeds if everyone's committed. What happens if I say no? Then we delay the software integration phase to accommodate your original timeline. But that pushes our final deadline by 3 months and costs the company productivity losses that dwarf the overtime expense. Daniel met his gaze. I'm not trying to make your life harder, Marcus. I'm trying to make this project successful. Tell me what you need to make the accelerated timeline work. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He sat back, considering. I need guaranteed weekend coverage from the facilities team. Can't have my guys standing around waiting for access. Done. I'll coordinate with Frank Kowalski personally, and I need approval to bring in 2 additional technicians for the intensive phases. I'll have that authorization to you by tomorrow morning. Marcus extended his hand. All right, Brooks, you've got yourself a deal, but if this goes sideways, I'm telling everyone it was your idea. Fair enough? By Friday afternoon, Daniel had buy-in from every team lead and a comprehensive implementation plan that addressed every major concern. He also had a crushing headache and had forgotten to eat lunch for the 3rd day in a row. Claire appeared in his doorway at 5 p.m. with a sandwich and a stern expression. Eat this. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on caffeine and adrenaline, and you look like you haven't seen sunlight in days. She set the sandwich on his desk. Eat. That's an order. You're not my boss. I'm your friend who's keeping you from collapsing like I did. Eat the sandwich, Daniel. He ate the sandwich. Claire perched on the edge of his desk, watching him with an expression that was part amusement, part genuine concern. You know what tomorrow is? She asked. Saturday? It's Miles's custody evaluation. Vanessa's lawyer is coming to see your new apartment and assess the living situation. Daniel had completely forgotten. He'd been so consumed with the Cascade project that the custody evaluation had slipped his mind entirely. Oh God, I haven't even cleaned. The place is a disaster. Then leave now. Go home, spend time with your son, clean your apartment, and get some sleep. The presentation prep can wait until tomorrow. The presentation is Monday. You need to not burn out before the most important presentation of your career, Claire interrupted. And you need to remember what you're doing this for. It's not just the job, Daniel. It's Miles. Don't lose sight of that. She was right. Daniel saved his work, grabbed his briefcase, and headed home. The apartment was indeed a disaster. Dishes in the sink, Miles's toys scattered across the living room, laundry piled on every available surface. He'd been so focused on proving himself at work that he'd let everything else slide. Miles was at the kitchen table when Daniel walked in, working on homework with Mrs. Chen supervising. He looked up with a grin that immediately made Daniel's stress levels drop. Dad, you're home early. I am. Thought maybe we could have dinner together. Actually sit down and eat like normal people. Mrs. Chen gathered her things, patting Daniel's shoulder on her way out. He's a good boy. You're doing well by him. After she left, Daniel looked around the apartment with fresh eyes. It wasn't just messy. It was clear that he'd been neglecting the home front. This was what Vanessa's lawyer would see tomorrow, evidence that Daniel was too consumed with work to properly care for his son. "Hey, Miles, how would you feel about us having a cleaning party tonight?" His son's face scrunched up. "That doesn't sound like a party. What if I order pizza and we put on music and make it a game? See who can clean their section fastest? Can I have extra cheese on my pizza?" "You can have whatever you want." They spent the next 3 hours transforming the apartment. Miles tackled his toys and books while Daniel handled the kitchen, bathroom, and living room. They sang along to music, competed for speed records, and turned the mundane task into something that felt like quality time. By 9 p.m., the apartment looked better than it had in months. After Miles went to bed, Daniel sat in the quiet living room, looking around at the clean space. It wasn't fancy. The furniture was secondhand, the carpet was stained, the walls needed paint. But it was clean, safe, and filled with evidence of a child who was loved. Photos on the walls, Miles's artwork on the refrigerator, books stacked on shelves. This was enough. It had to be enough. Saturday morning brought Vanessa and her lawyer, a severe woman named Patricia Robbins, who carried a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd seen every parental failure imaginable. Daniel had cleaned himself up, put on decent clothes, and prepared Miles for the visit. "Just be yourself, buddy," he'd said. "Answer her questions honestly." Vanessa looked uncomfortable as she entered the apartment, probably remembering the last time she'd been here. 6 months ago, when she'd come to tell Daniel she was filing for full custody. But Patricia Robbins was all business, walking through each room, taking notes, asking questions. "How many bedrooms?" she asked. "One. Miles and I share it. He has the bottom bunk." "And where do you sleep?" "Top bunk." She made a note. "Mr. Brooks, can you walk me through a typical day with your son?" For the next hour, Daniel described their routine. Morning breakfast, walking Miles to school, his workday, picking up Miles from after-school care, homework time, dinner, bedtime stories. He showed her the kitchen stocked with healthy food, the homework station at the table, the bookshelf full of age-appropriate reading material. "And your new job?" Patricia asked. "You started 3 weeks ago?" "Yes, ma'am. Operations coordinator at Meridian Technologies." "That's a significant position. How are you managing the demands of a new job with single parenting responsibilities?" This was the trap. Daniel felt Vanessa watching him, waiting to see how he'd answer. "It's been challenging," he admitted. "I've worked long hours the past few weeks, which meant relying on my neighbor Mrs. Chen more than I'd like. But I'm past the initial learning curve now, and I'm getting better at balancing both responsibilities. Miles is my priority. The job exists to support him, not the other way around." Patricia turned to Miles, who'd been sitting quietly on the couch. "Miles, can you tell me about living with your dad?" "It's good," Miles said. "We have fun. Dad helps me with homework and makes me eat vegetables even though I don't want to." He paused. "And he always keeps his promises." "What kind of promises?" "Like when he said we'd get a better apartment when he got a good job, and that he'd take me to the science museum for my birthday, and that he'd never leave me." Miles looked at Daniel with that absolute faith that still made his chest tight. "Dad always keeps his promises." Patricia made more notes. After another 30 minutes of questions and observations, she packed up her clipboard and turned to Vanessa. "I've seen enough. I'll have my report ready by next week." After they left, Daniel sat on the couch with Miles, emotionally exhausted. "Did I do okay?" Miles asked quietly. "You did perfect, kiddo. I'm proud of you." "Are we going to be okay? Is Mom going to take me away?" Daniel pulled his son close. "I don't know what's going to happen, buddy, but I promise I'm doing everything I can to make sure we get to stay together." "You always keep your promises." "I try my best." The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of presentation preparation. Claire came over Sunday afternoon, which surprised Daniel and delighted Miles, who immediately decided she was the coolest person ever when she played video games with him for an hour. "Your son is adorable," Claire said later, when Miles was occupied with a cartoon. She and Daniel sat at the kitchen table, laptops open, reviewing his presentation materials. "He has your eyes. Poor kid. I'm serious, and the way he talks about you, Daniel, he worships you." "He shouldn't. I'm just fumbling through this like everyone else." That's not what he sees. He sees someone who sacrificed everything to do the right thing, someone who keeps showing up no matter how hard it gets. Claire looked at him seriously. You're a good father. I hope that lawyer sees that. They worked through the presentation for another 3 hours, Claire pushing Daniel to sharpen his arguments, anticipate objections, and present with confidence rather than apology. By the time she left, Daniel felt as prepared as he'd ever be. You've got this, Claire said at the door. Just remember, you're not asking for permission. You're presenting a solution to a problem they haven't been able to solve. Own that. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Daniel dressed in his best suit, checked his presentation materials 3 times, and arrived at the office at 7:30. The executive committee meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room on the 22nd floor. Claire met him for their usual coffee, but this time she seemed almost as nervous as he was. You okay? Daniel asked. I'm fine, just the executive committee can be intense. My father will be fair, but some of the others can be challenging. She stirred her coffee absently. Particularly James Thornton, the CFO. He's going to focus on the budget implications and push back on anything that looks like risk. Good to know. And Margaret Chen, no relation to Thomas, is our general counsel. She'll want to know about contractual obligations and vendor agreements. Daniel absorbed this information, mentally preparing for each potential challenge. At 9:45, Thomas appeared at his office door. Ready? As I'll ever be. Good. One piece of advice, they're going to test you. Push back, ask hard questions, look for weaknesses. Don't take it personally. They're protecting the company's interests. Understood. The main conference room was impressive even by Meridian standards. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views, a table that could seat 20, and technology that would make NASA jealous. 7 executives were already seated when Daniel entered with Thomas. Richard Hale sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other C-level officers. Claire sat halfway down, giving Daniel an encouraging nod. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard said, this is Daniel Brooks, our new operations coordinator. He's here to present a restructuring proposal for the Cascade project. Daniel, the floor is yours. Daniel connected his laptop to the presentation system, took a breath, and began. For the first 10 minutes, he laid out the problem. The current timeline delays, budget overruns, and coordination failures that had plagued the project for months. He showed data, metrics, concrete evidence of systematic issues. Then he shifted to his solution, walking through the restructured timeline, the resource reallocation, the risk mitigation strategies. The executives listened without interruption until he finished. Then James Thornton, the CFO, leaned forward. Your proposal requires significant overtime expenditure in the short term, Thornton said. How do you justify that cost when we're already over budget? The overtime costs are offset by reducing the overall project timeline, Daniel replied. We're currently paying for extended project management, delayed productivity losses, and compound inefficiencies. Net savings of approximately $200,000. Approximately, I need exact numbers. $197,400. The detailed breakdown is in the appendix. Thornton pulled up the appendix, scanning the numbers. And if the accelerated timeline slips? If teams can't deliver on the compressed schedule? We have buffer built into each phase. A 2-week slip still keeps us on the revised timeline and under budget. 3 weeks or more, and we revert to the alternative sequencing outlined in Section 4. Margaret Chen spoke up next. What about vendor contracts? The original agreements were based on specific timelines. Are we exposing ourselves to penalties or renegotiation costs? I've reviewed all vendor contracts with their respective team leads. Most include flexibility clauses that allow for schedule adjustments with adequate notice. The 2 that don't, servers and networking equipment, we're actually accelerating in ways that benefit the vendors. They're willing to accommodate without contract modifications. You've confirmed this directly with the vendors? Yes, ma'am. I have written confirmations from both, included in Appendix C. The questions continued for 40 minutes. Each executive probed a different aspect of the proposal, looking for weaknesses, testing assumptions. Daniel answered each question directly, backed by data, never apologizing or hedging. He'd done the work. He knew the material. He believed in the solution. Finally, Richard spoke. You've been with this company for 3 weeks. What makes you think you understand this project better than the people who've been working on it for months?" The room went silent. This was the test. Daniel met Richard's gaze directly. "I don't think I understand the project better, sir. I think I see it differently because I'm new. The teams who've been working on this are brilliant, dedicated, and deeply knowledgeable. But they're also stuck in patterns that aren't working. Sometimes an outside perspective can identify solutions that aren't visible from inside the problem." He paused. "I'm not saying I'm smarter. I'm saying I'm offering a fresh approach that leverages all their expertise in a new framework." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Approval, maybe satisfaction. He turned to the other executives. "Discussion?" Thomas spoke first. "I've reviewed this proposal extensively. It's solid. More importantly, Brooks has already secured buy-in from every team lead. They're ready to implement if we give approval." Claire added, "From a technology perspective, the restructured sequence actually improves our integration efficiency. We've been doing installations in an order that made sense on paper but created practical complications. This fixes that." The other executives weighed in, some supportive, some still skeptical. Finally, Richard called for a vote. The proposal passed 6-1, with Thornton abstaining rather than opposing. "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks," Richard said. "You have authorization to proceed. I expect weekly progress reports and immediate notification of any issues. Questions?" "No, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet. Now comes the hard part. Actually delivering on what you've promised." After the meeting, Daniel practically floated back to his office. He'd done it, presented to the executive committee and gotten approval for a major project restructuring after 3 weeks on the job. Claire caught up with him in the hallway, grinning. "That was impressive. Thornton almost never abstains. That means you nearly convinced him completely. I thought I was going to throw up when your father asked that last question. He was testing you, seeing if you get defensive or own your perspective." She squeezed his arm. "You owned it. Well done." Daniel's phone buzzed. Vanessa. "I need to take this," he told Claire. "Go. I'll see you later." Daniel stepped into his office and answered. "Hey." "Patricia submitted her report this morning," Vanessa said without preamble. "She's recommending 50-50 custody, effective immediately." Daniel sat down hard in his chair. "Immediately?" "Pending judge approval, which should come through in the next week or two." Daniel, she was really impressed. Said Miles is clearly thriving with you, that your living situation is stable, and that you've demonstrated commitment to balancing work and parenting. Vanessa's voice softened. She also said Miles clearly loves you very much. That mattered. "Thank you for telling me. I'll have my lawyer send over the revised agreement. We can work out the specific schedule, maybe alternating weeks to start." "That works. Vanessa, thank you for being reasonable about this." "You've earned it. You really turned things around, Daniel. I'm proud of you." After the call ended, Daniel sat in his office, looking out at the Chicago skyline, letting the enormity of the moment wash over him. In 3 weeks, his entire life had transformed. New job, financial stability, custody arrangement that let him actually be a father to his son, all because he'd stopped in a crosswalk to help a stranger. His computer chimed with an email from Thomas. Subject line, Cascade Project, Implementation Authorization. Daniel opened it to find formal approval, resource allocations, and a project kickoff meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. This was real. This was happening. Another email arrived, this one from Claire. "Dinner tonight? My treat. You deserve to celebrate." Daniel hesitated, thinking about all the work ahead, all the responsibilities waiting. Then he thought about Claire's words from Friday. "Don't lose sight of what matters." "Can Miles come?" he typed back. "He's the reason I'm here." "Absolutely. I'll make reservations for 3. See you at 7. That evening, Daniel picked up Miles from school and told him they were going out to celebrate. Miles's eyes went wide when Daniel mentioned Claire would be joining them. "The video game lady? Really? Really? Is she your girlfriend?" Daniel felt his face flush. "No, buddy. She's my friend. A good friend who's helped me a lot." "But you smile different when you talk about her." "I do not." "Do too." They met Claire at an Italian restaurant in River North. Nice but not intimidating, with checkered tablecloths and breadsticks that Miles attacked with enthusiasm. Claire arrived in jeans and a casual sweater, looking more relaxed than Daniel had ever seen her at work. "Miles!" She greeted his son with a high five. "Ready for a rematch on that racing game?" "You're going to lose again," Miles said confidently. "We'll see about that." Over dinner, Daniel watched Claire interact with his son, asking about school, listening to his stories about science class, treating him like a person rather than just a kid. Miles blossomed under her attention, becoming animated and talkative in ways Daniel rarely saw with adults. "Your dad did something really impressive today," Claire told Miles over dessert. "He presented a big project to all the top executives at our company, and they approved his plan." "Dad's good at his job," Miles said matter-of-factly. "He's good at everything." "I don't know about everything," Daniel protested. "Name one thing you're not good at," Miles challenged. "Video games. Claire's better at those than me." "Okay, one thing." "One? But you're still really good at most stuff." After dinner, Daniel walked Claire to her car while Miles waited on a nearby bench playing on Daniel's phone. "Thank you for tonight," Daniel said. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to. You've accomplished something remarkable in 3 weeks, Daniel. You should celebrate that." Claire leaned against her car. "And honestly, I wanted to meet Miles properly. See who puts that expression on your face when you talk about him." "What expression?" "Pure love. It's nice to see." She smiled. "He's a great kid. You've done well with him." "I'm trying. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "That's called being a parent. You're doing better than you think." Claire hesitated, then added, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I collapsed in that crosswalk, I'd convinced myself that work was everything, that success meant sacrifice, that relationships and personal health were luxuries I couldn't afford. Watching you with Miles tonight, the way you prioritize him, the way he's clearly the center of your world, it reminds me what actually matters." She looked at him seriously. "You saved my life that day, but you're also teaching me how to live it better, so thank you for that." Daniel didn't know what to say. The moment stretched between them, charged with something he couldn't quite name. "Dad," Miles called from the bench, "can we go home? I have homework." The spell broke. Claire laughed. "Homework on a Monday night? He really is your kid." Unfortunately for him, yes. Daniel drove home with Miles, chattering about the dinner, about Claire, about how she was the coolest grown-up besides Daniel. When they got home, Miles settled at the kitchen table with his math homework while Daniel cleaned up from breakfast, feeling a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Thanks for letting me crash your celebration. Had more fun than I've had in months." "Same here. Miles declared you officially cool, which is high praise." "Best compliment I've gotten all year." "See you tomorrow morning? Coffee at 8? "Wouldn't miss it." Daniel helped Miles with his homework, got him ready for bed, and read 3 chapters of their current book before his son finally fell asleep. Then he sat at the kitchen table with the Cascade Project implementation plan, mapping out the next 6 months, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the satisfaction of purpose. He thought about crosswalks and choices, about strangers who became friends, about children who believed their fathers could do anything. He thought about Patricia Robin's recommendation and 50-50 custody and the future he'd been terrified of losing. Mostly, though, he thought about how a single moment of compassion had somehow transformed into this: a life rebuilt, a family preserved, a purpose rediscovered. Some risks were worth taking, some choices defined everything that came after. Daniel had made his choice in that crosswalk, not knowing where it would lead, trusting only that helping someone mattered more than helping himself. Now, sitting in his clean apartment with his sleeping son in the next room and a career that finally felt like more than just survival, Daniel understood what he'd actually chosen that day. He'd chosen the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of father Miles deserved, the kind of person who could look at himself in the mirror without flinching. Everything else, the job, the stability, the friendship with Claire, the future stretching ahead with possibility, was just the universe's way of confirming he'd chosen right. The Cascade Project implementation began the following Tuesday with what Thomas called a coordination marathon. Back-to-back meetings with every team involved, walking through the restructured timeline, answering questions, and securing final commitments. Daniel had prepared meticulously, but nothing quite matched the reality of managing a dozen strong personalities, each with their own priorities and concerns. Marcus Webb showed up to the kickoff meeting with his two new technicians and a skeptical expression that suggested he was still waiting for the whole plan to fall apart. Frank Kowalski brought his facilities team, looking equally dubious. The software integration lead, a brilliant but intense woman named Dr. Sarah Park, spent the first 20 minutes poking holes in the timeline until Daniel walked her through the specific accommodations he'd built in for her team's needs. "You actually read our technical specifications," Sarah said, sounding surprised. "Of course. How else would I know how to sequence the work properly? The last 3 coordinators didn't bother. They just told us to make it work." She studied him with new appreciation. "All right, Brooks, you've got my attention. Let's see if you can keep it." By the end of the first week, the project was ahead of schedule. Marcus's team completed the first floor installation in 4 days instead of the projected 5. Frank's facilities crew had the access coordination running so smoothly that there were 0 conflicts. Sarah's software team was already prepping for their integration phase, energized by the clear timeline and proper sequencing. "I hate to say it," Marcus told Daniel on Friday afternoon, "but this is actually working. You sound disappointed." "I am. I was looking forward to saying I told you so." Marcus grinned. "Keep it up, kid. You might actually pull this off." The success of the first week brought unexpected attention. Other departments started requesting Daniel's coordination support for their projects. Thomas began pulling him into strategic planning meetings. Richard Hale stopped by his office one morning with a simple nod of approval that somehow meant more than 1,000 words. But it was Claire's reaction that mattered most to Daniel. Their morning coffee meetings had become the anchor of his day. 30 minutes where they weren't just colleagues, but friends, talking about everything from project challenges to Miles's latest school adventures to Claire's own struggles with work-life balance. "You're different than you were a month ago," Claire observed one morning in late October. They sat in her office, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and rose. "More confident, more settled. I feel different, like I'm actually supposed to be here instead of just pretending until someone figures out I don't belong." Imposter syndrome. It's common, especially for people who rise quickly. Claire sipped her coffee. "But you do belong here, Daniel. You've proven that." "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That a month ago I was loading trucks in a warehouse, and now I'm coordinating million-dollar projects. 2 months ago I was collapsing in crosswalks. Life changes fast when you let it." She set down her cup. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it, stopping to help me, knowing what it cost you initially?" Daniel didn't need time to think. "Never. Not for a second." "Why not?" "Because the alternative would have meant being someone I'm not. Someone who walks past people in need because it's inconvenient. Someone who teaches his son that getting ahead matters more than doing right." He met her gaze. "I'd rather be broke with integrity than successful without it." "You're not broke anymore." "No, but that's luck, not the point. The point is making choices you can live with." Claire was quiet for a moment, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You know what's funny? I spent years working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing everything for career advancement, believing that success required that kind of dedication. Then you show up, accomplish more in a month than some people do in a year, and you still make it home for dinner with your son most nights. It's making me reconsider my entire approach to life." "I'm not a role model, Claire. I'm just trying to be a decent father." "That's exactly what makes you a role model." She checked her watch. "Speaking of which, Miles's birthday is next week, right? The Science Museum trip?" Daniel was surprised she remembered. "Yeah, he's been counting down the days. Can I come?" "To a 7-year-old's birthday outing? Why not? I like Miles, and I've never been to the Science Museum. Seems like I'm missing out." Claire smiled. "Unless that's too weird, I don't want to intrude on family time." "It's not weird. Miles would love it. Fair warning, though, he's going to talk about dinosaurs for approximately 4 straight hours." "I can handle dinosaurs." That Saturday, Daniel, Miles, and Claire spent the entire day at the Museum of Science and Industry. Miles was in heaven, racing from exhibit to exhibit, peppering them both with questions, demonstrating experiments, and explaining scientific concepts with the confident authority only a 7-year-old could muster. Claire was a revelation. She didn't just tolerate Miles's enthusiasm, she matched it, getting genuinely excited about the exhibits, asking questions that encouraged him to think deeper, treating his observations with the same seriousness she'd give a colleague's presentation. Daniel watched them examine a model of the solar system together, Claire kneeling to Miles's height as he explained the difference between terrestrial and gas giant planets, and felt something shift in his chest. "Your friend is really smart," Miles whispered to Daniel while Claire was in the restroom. "And pretty. And she thinks I'm smart too." "You're smart, buddy." "I know, but she listens like she really cares about what I say. Most grown-ups just pretend." Miles looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. "You like her, more than just friends." Daniel felt his face heat. "Miles? It's okay, Dad. I like her too. She makes you smile for real, not just the pretend smile you do when you're worried about stuff." Before Daniel could figure out how to respond to that, Claire returned, and Miles dragged them both toward the submarine exhibit. But the conversation stayed with Daniel all day, echoing in his mind every time Claire laughed at something Miles said, every time their eyes met over his son's head, every time her hand brushed his arm as they navigated the crowded museum. They ended the day with ice cream at Miles's favorite shop, the three of them squeezed into a booth meant for two, Miles in the middle chattering happily about his favorite exhibits. When Claire insisted on paying, Miles gave her a chocolate-smeared hug that left a stain on her shirt. She didn't even flinch, just hugged him back and told him it was the best birthday celebration she'd attended in years. "Thank you for letting me crash this," she said later, as Daniel walked her to her car. Miles was already buckled into Daniel's vehicle, playing on his phone and studiously not watching them. "Thank you for coming. It meant a lot to him, to both of us. I had fun, real fun, not the obligatory corporate event kind." Claire leaned against her car. "Your son told me I should come to his next birthday too. Apparently I'm approved for future family events." "High praise, Ben." "The highest." She hesitated, then added, "He also told me I make you happy. I hope that's okay." Daniel's heart hammered. "It's more than okay. It's true." "Good. Because you make me happy too." Claire reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "See you Monday morning? Coffee at 8? Wouldn't miss it." Daniel drove home with Miles, his mind spinning. When had Claire become more than just a friend? When had morning coffee become the best part of his day? When had he started looking forward to her texts, her laugh, the way she challenged him to think differently? "Dad?" Miles's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you going to ask Claire to be your girlfriend?" "Buddy, it's complicated. We work together and grown-ups always say stuff is complicated when they're scared." Miles looked at him seriously. "But you told me being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're being brave anyway, remember?" Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. Daniel smiled despite himself. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." The Cascade Project continued its remarkable progress through October and into November. Every milestone hit on time or early. Budget tracking showed them consistently under projections. Team morale was the highest it had been in months, with multiple team leads commenting that this was the smoothest major project they'd ever worked on. Thomas called Daniel into his office the second week of November with news that made his head spin. "Corporate wants to use the Cascade implementation as a case study. You'll be presenting the methodology at the National Operations Conference in December." National conference? As in industry-wide? As in every major tech company in the country sends their operations leaders to learn best practices. "You'll be a featured speaker." Thomas smiled at Daniel's expression. "Congratulations. You've officially made yourself invaluable." Daniel's personal life was transforming just as dramatically. The custody arrangement with Vanessa had been finalized, alternating weeks with Miles, holidays split fairly, and a relationship between Daniel and his ex-wife that had evolved into genuine co-parenting respect. Vanessa had even congratulated him on the Cascade success when Miles had mentioned it during her week. "You've really figured it out," she'd told Daniel during a drop-off exchange. "I'm impressed. And I'm glad Miles has this version of you in his life." "This version?" "The version who knows what he's capable of, who isn't just surviving but actually thriving." She paused. Richard mentioned you're seeing someone, Claire Hale. Daniel felt his stomach drop. It's not like that. We're friends. Miles says otherwise. He talks about her constantly. Vanessa smiled. It's okay, Daniel. You're allowed to be happy. Just be careful. Office relationships can get complicated. But the truth was, Daniel and Claire hadn't addressed what was clearly developing between them. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had explicitly named. They texted late into the night about everything and nothing. They found excuses to work together on projects that didn't really require both of them. They'd had dinner together, just the two of them, 3 times in the past month, conversations stretching for hours until restaurants closed around them. Everyone at Meridian had noticed. The office gossip had reached a fever pitch, speculation running wild about the nature of their relationship. But Daniel and Claire existed in a strange limbo, more than friends, not quite anything else, both too cautious to push forward into territory that could complicate their professional lives. It was Claire who finally broke the stalemate. She appeared at Daniel's office door one evening in late November, long after most people had gone home. Daniel was still there, reviewing projections for the final cascade phase, and looked up to find her standing in the doorway with an expression he'd never seen before. Vulnerable, uncertain, determined. "We need to talk," she said. Daniel's heart sank. Those 4 words never meant anything good. "Okay, come in." Claire closed the door behind her and sat across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to just listen until I'm done. Can you do that?" "Of course." She took a breath. "I like you, Daniel. More than like you. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I make excuses to stop by your office during the day. I think about you when I should be thinking about work. And I know this is complicated because we work together, because of my father, because of a dozen other reasons. But I can't keep pretending this is just friendship when it feels like so much more." Daniel opened his mouth, but Claire held up a hand. "I'm not done. I know you have Miles to think about. I know your custody arrangement is new, and you need to protect that. I know your job here is critical to your stability, and you can't risk messing that up. I understand all of that. But I also think, I hope, that you feel this too, whatever this is." She finally met his gaze. "Am I completely off base? Have I been reading this wrong?" "No," Daniel said quietly. "You're not reading it wrong. So you feel it too." "I feel it too. I felt it for weeks, maybe longer." Daniel stood and moved around the desk, sitting in the chair beside her instead of across from her. "Claire, you're amazing. You're brilliant and funny and kind, and you've changed my life in ways I can't even articulate. Miles adores you. I adore you. But I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of screwing this up. Of losing you as a friend if we try to be more and it doesn't work. Of losing my job if your father thinks I'm taking advantage of his daughter. Of losing my stability right when Miles finally has the life he deserves." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I'm terrified of wanting something this much because the last time I wanted something this much, it fell apart and hurt everyone involved." Claire reached out and took his hand. "I'm terrified too, but I'm more terrified of looking back in 10 years and regretting that I never took this chance, that I let fear keep me from something that could be extraordinary." "What about your father? The company policy about relationships?" "There's no policy against relationships between employees as long as there's no direct reporting relationship. You report to Thomas, not me. We're equals, Daniel. And as for my father, I'm 34 years old. I make my own choices about my personal life." "The optics, though. People will say I'm using you for career advancement. Let them say it. The people who matter, my father, Thomas, the executives who've seen your work, they know better. You've earned everything you have here." Claire squeezed his hand. "I need to know something, though. If all the obstacles weren't there, the job, my father, Miles, all of it, would you want to try this? Us?" Daniel looked at her, really looked, saw the hope in her eyes mixed with fear, the vulnerability of someone who'd just put her heart on the line, thought about morning coffee and shared laughter and the way she'd knelt beside Miles at the museum, genuinely interested in a 7-year-old's enthusiasm for planets. Thought about how she'd saved him just as much as he'd saved her, in different ways but equally profound. Yes, he said. Without hesitation, yes. Then let's try. We'll go slow, be careful, make sure Miles is comfortable with it. We'll keep it private at work until we're sure about where this is going. We'll communicate honestly about concerns and boundaries. Claire smiled. But let's try. Because I think this could be something really special, and I don't want to lose it because we were too scared to find out. Daniel leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, perfect. When they pulled apart, Claire was grinning. So that's a yes? That's a yes. They decided to tell Miles first before anyone else because he deserved to know. Daniel brought it up that Saturday morning over breakfast, his nerves making him stumble over the words. Buddy, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Claire. Miles looked up from his cereal, eyes brightening. Are you finally asking her to be your girlfriend? How did you? Dad, I'm 7, not stupid. You've been making googly eyes at each other for weeks. Daniel had to laugh. Googly eyes? That's what Mrs. Chen calls it. She says you're smitten. Miles took another bite of cereal. So? Are you? If that's okay with you, I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with it before anything changed. Miles considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing world-changing decisions. Is she going to be mean to me? Or try to replace Mom? Never. She cares about you very much, and she'd never try to replace your mom. This doesn't change anything about you and me or you and your mom. It just means Claire might be around more often. Can she come to my soccer games? If you want her to. And help with my science projects? I'm sure she'd love that. Miles nodded, satisfied. Okay then, you can be her boyfriend. But Dad? Yeah, buddy? Be nice to her. She's really cool and I don't want you to mess it up. I'll do my best. Good. Miles returned to his cereal as if they'd just discussed the weather. Can we go to the park later? I want to practice soccer before my game next week. They kept the relationship quiet at work, but it transformed everything outside the office. Dinners together became dates. Text conversations deepened into real intimacy. Claire started joining their weekend activities, soccer games, park visits, lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes and cartoons. She fit into their lives so naturally that within weeks, Daniel couldn't remember what Saturdays had felt like without her. Miles adored having her around, showing off for her at soccer, asking her opinion on everything from homework to which superhero was objectively the coolest. And Claire treated him with the same genuine interest she'd shown from the beginning, never condescending, always engaged. You're good at this, Daniel told her one evening after they'd gotten Miles to bed. They sat on his couch, her head on his shoulder, the apartment quiet around them. At what? Being part of this. Our life. Some people would find it overwhelming, dating someone with a kid, all the complications that come with it, but you make it look easy. It's not easy, Claire said honestly. It's terrifying sometimes. I've never done this before. Been in a relationship with someone who has a child, had to think about someone else's needs and schedules and emotional well-being, but Miles makes it worth the effort, and so do you. The Cascade project wrapped up 2 weeks before Christmas, 3 days ahead of schedule, and $40,000 under budget. The final implementation went flawlessly, servers humming, software integrated perfectly, security protocols functioning seamlessly. Thomas stood in the main server room watching the final systems come online and turned to Daniel with genuine admiration. I've been doing this for 20 years, Thomas said. I have never seen a project this complex execute this smoothly. You did the impossible, Brooks. The teams did the impossible. I just coordinated them. Leadership is coordination. Don't diminish what you accomplished here. Thomas extended his hand. Well done. The executive committee held a Project Wrap celebration the following week, and Richard Hale made a point of publicly commending Daniel's work. The whole company attended, champagne flowing, congratulations echoing. Daniel stood there feeling surreal, remembering the desperate man who'd missed an interview 2 months ago, the father who'd been terrified of losing everything. Claire found him on the periphery of the celebration, slipping her hand into his where no one could see. You deserve this, she whispered. Every bit of it. I keep waiting to wake up. This isn't a dream. This is your life now. Better get used to it. That Christmas was the best Daniel could remember. He had Miles for Christmas Eve and morning, and they spent it in their apartment, now upgraded to a two-bedroom place with actual furniture and a small tree that Miles had decorated with enthusiasm, if not expertise. Claire joined them for breakfast, bringing presents she'd clearly spent too much time picking out. She gave Miles a telescope he'd mentioned wanting once in passing and gave Daniel a framed photograph from the museum trip, the three of them in front of the submarine, all of them laughing. "When did you take this?" Daniel asked, studying the image. "Asked a stranger to snap it when you weren't paying attention. I thought you might want a record of that day." Daniel pulled her close, kissing her temple. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "I'm really not. Perfect for us, then." The National Operations Conference in December was Daniel's first experience with industry recognition beyond Meridian. He presented the Cascade methodology to a room of 300 operations professionals, walking through the restructuring approach, the coordination strategies, the lessons learned. The response was overwhelming. Standing ovation, dozens of questions, business cards pressed into his hands by executives wanting to implement similar approaches at their companies. Claire attended his presentation, sitting in the back row, beaming with pride. Afterward, she introduced him to industry leaders, helped him network, stood beside him like a partner in every sense of the word. "You know this means job offers are going to start coming in," she said that evening over dinner. "Companies are going to want to recruit you away from Meridian." Daniel hadn't considered that. "I'm not going anywhere." "You might want to. Better salary, bigger opportunities." "Claire, I'm happy where I am. The job is good, the people are good, and everything I care about is in Chicago." He reached across the table for her hand. "I'm not looking for bigger. I'm looking for sustainable, for meaningful. I have that at Meridian." She smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Good, because selfishly, I really didn't want you to leave." January brought Miles's custody evaluation review, the 3-month checkpoint to ensure the arrangement was working. Patricia Robbins returned, clipboard in hand, ready to assess Daniel's continued stability. But this time, Daniel wasn't nervous. He walked her through their routine, showed her Miles's excellent report card, introduced her to Claire as someone who'd become important in their lives. "Mr. Brooks," Patricia said after her evaluation, "I have to say, this is one of the most positive transformations I've seen. 3 months ago, you were barely holding on. Now you've built something genuinely stable and healthy for your son. My recommendation is to make the current arrangement permanent." After she left, Daniel called Vanessa to share the news. "That's wonderful, Daniel. Really wonderful." Vanessa sounded genuinely happy. "Miles is thriving with you. I can see it every time he comes back from your week. You've done well by him." "We've done well by him," Daniel corrected. "The co-parenting thing, it works because we're both committed to it." "Agreed." "And Daniel, Claire seems really good for you. Miles talks about her constantly. I'm glad you found someone." That evening, Daniel sat with Claire and Miles on his couch, watching a movie none of them were really paying attention to. Miles dozed between them, exhausted from soccer practice. Claire's hand rested on Daniel's shoulder, her thumb tracing absent patterns. "I love you," Daniel said quietly, the words slipping out before he'd consciously decided to say them. Claire went still. Then she shifted to look at him, her eyes bright. "What?" "I love you. I probably have for weeks, but I wasn't sure if it was too soon to say it. But sitting here with you and Miles, feeling this content and settled and happy, I couldn't not say it anymore. It's only been 2 months." "I know, if it's too fast, I love you too," Claire interrupted. "I was just waiting to see if you felt it." They kissed over Miles's sleeping head, gentle and sweet, the promise of a future neither of them had expected, but both of them wanted. By spring, the relationship had become common knowledge at Meridian. Richard Hale called them both into his office one April morning, and Daniel's stomach dropped, certain this was finally the conversation where the CEO expressed disapproval. Instead, Richard smiled and gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Sit, both of you. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while." Daniel and Claire exchanged nervous glances. "I'm assuming you think I called you in here to discuss your relationship," Richard continued. "And you're right, but probably not in the way you expect." He leaned back in his chair. I've watched you both over the past 6 months. I've seen how you work together, how you push each other to be better, how you maintain absolute professionalism at the office, despite whatever's happening personally. And more importantly, I've seen my daughter happier than she's been in years. Claire's hand found Daniel's under the table. Daniel, you saved my daughter's life twice. Once in that crosswalk, and once by showing her there's more to life than work. Claire, you helped Daniel see what he was capable of when he'd almost given up on himself. You're good for each other. Anyone with eyes can see that. Richard's expression turned serious. That said, I need to know your intentions are serious. Claire is my only child, and I won't see her hurt. Sir, I love your daughter, Daniel said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise that I'll always treat her with respect, honesty, and absolute commitment. She's part of my life now, part of my family. I'm not going anywhere. Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. That's what I needed to hear. He turned to Claire. And you? You're sure about this? Completely sure, Dad. He's everything I didn't know I was looking for. Then you have my blessing. Not that you needed it, you're both adults. But for whatever it's worth, I approve. Richard stood, signaling the meeting's end. Now get back to work. Just because you're dating my daughter doesn't mean you get special treatment, Brooks. Wouldn't dream of it, sir. Outside the office, Claire grabbed Daniel's hand and pulled him into an empty conference room, kissing him with an enthusiasm that suggested relief mixed with joy. That went better than expected, Daniel said when they came up for air. My father likes you. I knew he would. You're exactly the kind of person he respects. Honest, hardworking, good with challenges. I'm still terrified of him. Good. That means you have common sense. Claire checked her watch. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, but dinner tonight? Your place? I'll cook. You can cook? I'm full of surprises, Daniel Brooks. That summer, Daniel took a week off for the first time since starting at Meridian. He, Claire, and Miles drove up to a cabin in Wisconsin. A quiet week of hiking, fishing, board games, and family time. Miles taught Claire how to skip stones across the lake, while Daniel watched from the shore, marveling at how completely they'd become a unit. One evening, after Miles had gone to bed exhausted from a day of swimming, Daniel and Claire sat on the cabin porch, watching fireflies dance across the darkening lawn. I've been thinking about something, Claire said quietly, and I want to run it by you before I make any decisions. Okay. There's a position opening up, VP of Technology Strategy. It's a promotion, bigger responsibilities, more visibility, but it would also mean longer hours, more travel, more stress. She turned to face him. Before, I would have jumped at it without hesitation, but now I have you and Miles to consider. I want to make sure whatever I choose works for all of us, not just my career. Daniel took her hand. Do you want the position? I do, but not if it means sacrificing what we have. Then figure out how to make it work without sacrificing what we have. You're brilliant, Claire. You can design a role that plays to your strengths without consuming your life. And Miles and I will support you, whatever you decide. You're sure? I'm sure. You supported me when I was taking on the Cascade project, when I was terrified of failing. Now it's my turn to support you reaching for what you want. Claire kissed him, soft and grateful. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky. That day in the crosswalk, we both got impossibly, incredibly lucky. By the time Miles started third grade that fall, their family dynamic had solidified into something that felt permanent and right. Claire had accepted the VP position with negotiated flexibility for family commitments. Daniel had been promoted to Senior Operations Coordinator with a salary increase that meant he could finally afford the house with a yard he'd promised Miles. The custody arrangement had evolved to the point where Vanessa, Richard, Claire, and Daniel could all attend Miles's soccer games together without awkwardness, unified in their commitment to the child they all loved. One October evening, exactly 1 year after the Cascade project kickoff, Daniel stood in the kitchen of their new house, watching Claire help Miles with a science project at the dining room table. The house wasn't fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and enough space for all of them to breathe. Miles's artwork covered the refrigerator. Photos lined the walls, their family gradually expanding to include Claire in frame after frame. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Board meeting next week. They're discussing creating a new director of operations position. You interested? Daniel stared at the message, then looked up at Claire and Miles, heads bent together over a model volcano, laughing about something. He thought about the desperate father who'd stopped in a crosswalk a year ago, who'd chosen compassion over ambition and somehow ended up with both. Maybe, he typed back. Let's talk Monday. Because the truth was, Daniel had learned something crucial in the past year. Success wasn't just about climbing ladders or accumulating titles. It was about building a life that felt meaningful, surrounded by people you loved, doing work that mattered. He had that now. Whether he took another promotion or stayed exactly where he was, he had everything that counted. Dad, Miles called from the table. Come see. The volcano actually works. Daniel pocketed his phone and joined them, settling into the chair beside Claire, watching his son's face light up with pride over his creation. This was success. This moment, this family, this life built from a single choice to help a stranger. Claire leaned against his shoulder. Happy? She asked quietly. Incredibly happy. Good. Me too. Me? That December, Richard Hale announced his retirement, effective the following summer. The board was already planning the transition, discussing succession, preparing for a new era of leadership at Meridian. At the company holiday party, Richard pulled Daniel aside, away from the celebration. I wanted to thank you, Richard said, for everything you've done for my daughter, for this company, for showing us all what real integrity looks like. Sir, I didn't do anything extraordinary. You stopped in a crosswalk to help someone when you had every reason to keep walking. You sacrificed your own future for a stranger's safety. That's extraordinary, Daniel. That's who you are at your core. Richard smiled. And because of that choice, my daughter is happier than I've ever seen her. You gave her something I couldn't, perspective on what really matters. So thank you. She's given me just as much, sir. More, probably. Good relationships work that way, both people lifting each other up. Richard paused. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. Daniel's stomach tightened. Okay. My daughter is the most important thing in my world. If you're planning to make this permanent, and I suspect you are, I need to know you're ready for that. Ready for the commitment, the partnership, the life you'd be building together. Daniel met Richard's gaze directly. I've been ready for months, sir. I'm just waiting for the right moment to ask her. Richard's face split into a genuine smile. Good answer. And Daniel, you have my blessing. Not that you needed it, but you have it anyway. 2 months later, on a February afternoon at the Science Museum where they'd spent Miles's birthday, Daniel knelt in front of the submarine exhibit while Miles watched from a few feet away, grinning like he was in on the world's best secret. Claire had been studying a display about marine biology, completely unsuspecting when Daniel called her name. She turned to find him on one knee, ring box open, their entire life together reflected in his eyes. Claire Hale, a year and a half ago, I was a desperate man hanging on by a thread. Then you stumbled in a crosswalk, and everything changed. You changed my life, challenged me to be better, showed me what partnership really means. You love my son like he's your own. You make every day brighter just by being in it. I know this is fast by some standards, but when you've found what you're looking for, there's no point in waiting. His voice caught slightly. Will you marry me? Claire was crying, laughing, nodding all at once. Yes. Absolutely, yes. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly. Not too tight, not too loose, exactly right, just like them. Miles came running over, throwing his arms around both of them. Does this mean Claire's going to be my stepmom? If that's okay with you, Claire said, wiping her eyes. It's totally okay. Can I be in the wedding? You can be whatever you want to be in the wedding, buddy. They got married that June in a small ceremony at Millennium Park, near the fountain where Daniel had sat reading Claire's business card, convinced the universe was mocking him. Now he stood at an altar, Miles beside him as best man, watching Claire walk toward him in a simple white dress, her father's arm linked through hers, both of them beaming. The ceremony was short, the vows personal and honest. When the officiant pronounced them married, Miles cheered louder than anyone. and the small gathering of family and friends laughed with pure joy. At the reception, Richard stood to give a toast, his voice thick with emotion. When Claire was born, I made her a promise. I promised to protect her, provide for her, and help her build a life worth living. For 35 years, I tried to keep that promise. Then one day, she collapsed in a crosswalk, and a stranger caught her. That stranger turned out to be the answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd been praying. Someone who would love my daughter for who she is, who would challenge her to be her best self, who would show her that life is about more than work. Richard raised his glass. Daniel, you saved my daughter's life twice. Now you've given her a future worth living. Thank you for being the man I always hoped she'd find. Welcome to the family. The applause was deafening. Claire was crying again, happy tears that Daniel kissed away before pulling her onto the dance floor. How does it feel? She asked as they swayed to music, surrounded by everyone they loved. Being married to the boss's daughter? Terrifying, wonderful, perfect. Daniel pulled back to look at her. How does it feel being married to someone who used to load trucks for a living? Like I won the lottery. Claire rested her head against his chest. Thank you for stopping in that crosswalk, Daniel Brooks. Thank you for being the person who stops. Thank you for being worth stopping for. They danced until Miles cut in, insisting on dancing with his new stepmom, then with his dad, then demanding they all dance together in a circle that looked ridiculous and felt perfect. Later that evening, after the reception had wound down and Miles had fallen asleep on a couch in the venue, Daniel and Claire stood at the window looking out over the Chicago skyline. The city lights sparkled like stars, the same view Daniel had from his office, from their home, from every vantage point of the life they'd built together. Do you ever think about that day? Claire asked. What would have happened if you hadn't stopped? Sometimes, but not in a dwelling way, more like grateful acknowledgement that the choice was there and I made the right one. I think about it all the time, about how many people walked past me, how close I came to just being a statistic, another burned-out executive who pushed too hard, and then you stopped. She turned to face him. You changed my entire life by just being decent, by choosing compassion when you had every reason to choose ambition. I got more than I gave, Claire. You know that, right? You saved me just as much as I saved you. Then we saved each other. That's how the best partnerships work. Is that what we are? A partnership? The best one I've ever known. They stood there together, watching the city that had witnessed their entire story. The crosswalk, the interview building, the Meridian offices, the museum, the park where Miles played soccer, all of it interconnected in a web of choices and chances and moments that had led them here. Daniel thought about Marcus Webb, now a good friend who regularly joined them for barbecues. About Frank Kowalski, who'd helped them move into their house. About Thomas Chen, who'd stood as a groomsman in their wedding. About all the people who'd become part of their family, drawn together by a project that had started with a desperate choice in a crosswalk. He thought about Vanessa and Richard, sitting together at the reception, co-parenting Miles with the kind of mature grace that prioritized the child over old resentments. About Miles himself thriving in a world where he was surrounded by adults who loved him, supported him, showed him every day that character mattered more than success. Mostly, though, Daniel thought about second chances, about how one moment of compassion had cascaded into an entire life rebuilt, about how choosing right over easy had somehow led to having both, about how the universe sometimes rewarded people not for being perfect, but for being decent. Come on, Claire said, tugging his hand. Let's get Miles home. Our son needs his bed. Our son. The words still made Daniel's chest tight with gratitude. They drove through the Chicago night, Miles sleeping in the back seat, Claire's hand in Daniel's, the future stretching ahead with possibility and promise. Tomorrow, Daniel would go back to Meridian as the newly appointed Director of Strategic Operations. Claire would continue her work as VP of Technology Strategy. Miles would start soccer camp and begin his campaign for a puppy that would probably succeed by August. But tonight, they were just a family driving home together, the sum total of 1,000 small choices that had started with one big one. Stop or keep walking, help or pass by, compassion or ambition. Daniel had chosen to stop, had chosen to help, had chosen compassion. And in return, the universe had given him everything he'd never known he needed. A career that mattered, a son who thrived, a partner who challenged and cherished him in equal measure, and a life that felt less like survival and more like actually living. Some choices changed everything. Some moments defined decades. Some strangers became family. Daniel had learned all of that in a crosswalk one hot July afternoon, when he'd caught a falling woman and somehow caught hold of his entire future in the process. And he would make that choice again, every single time, for the rest of his life. Because some things were worth stopping for, some people were worth saving, and sometimes the person you saved ended up saving you right back.